Hello and welcome to stream. No face cam today. I am so tired. I am exhausted. No particular reason, I don't think, just 10. Starting off, we have a little bit of a call to action if you're interested. So these are some researchers at the University of Edinburgh, and they are doing a study on pronouns and how people use them to talk about people. And if you are interested, you can do it online. So sharing that first off the bat in case you're interested. I know it's the paper reading stream, but you can contribute to the paper that perhaps we will be reading at some point in the future. And we also have some other studies we're going to talk about today. So first of all, Daniel Mehrend was kind enough to give me an author copy of this paper, The Algorithm Knows I'm Black, from Users to Subjects, which I'm very excited for. And we're also going to read this paper by Carolyn Array? I think it might be Italian? Array? Anyway, Carolina Array. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. An autoethnography of automated powerlessness, lacking platform affordances and Instagram and TikTok account deletions. So we've got some platform study stuff. We are not going to read all of this, but there is a book that's just come out on Tumblr, which is a social media platform that is all open access. So I thought we might do a quick skim of that as well. I don't know, social media has just been on the mind. It's something that was a research area for me in grad school. I worked on Vine. I was actively working on Vine when it ceased to exist. So as you can imagine, I was a little bit sad about that. And then this is a paper that somebody recommended on stream on Thursday. So researching and revising what language models say using language models. And I don't believe that this has actually been published. I think this is just a preprint. And then finally, we have this paper that we'll see how I feel about this paper after I read it. The sounds of swearing are there universal patterns in profanity. And this is from the Psychonomic Bulletin and Review, and it is by two psychologists, I believe. I believe they're both in the psychology departments, Department of Psychology and Department of Psychology, yes. May or may not be particularly enjoyable for me as a linguist. We'll find out. So let's hop on in with no further ado. Paper 1, The Algorithm Knows I'm Black, from Users to Subjects. And this is by Daniel Mehrend from the University of Michigan. And I believe he's currently visiting the University of Washington. And just for transparency, I do have an institutional affiliation with both those universities. I got my PhD at the University of Washington. I'm currently just wrapping up adjuncting there. I turned in my grading yesterday. That's why I'm tired. I've been doing grading. Aha! I think that's actually it, because it's pretty taxing and I have more grading to do. I'm also currently visiting faculty at the University of Michigan, where I also have, God, so much grading left to do. So, one mystery solved, but also I do have an institutional affiliation. I don't think we've ever met. I just happened to run across this and be like, sounds cool. So, abstract. In October 2019, several Black Netflix users took to Twitter to air their grievances about images of movie thumbnails featuring Black actors with minor roles, even when the movie itself was a majority white cast. In response to these critiques, Netflix claimed that because users are not asked about their racial identity, it is impossible to personalize the individual Netflix experience using identity markers. This article explores the interplay between algorithmic cultures and representations of race, examining the identity and voices of users and how their agency is affected within algorithmic systems. Users are seeking agentic traction in these algorithmic spaces, and thus research begins to address how Black users are positioning themselves to make sense of the digital constraints placed on them. Black subscribers of Netflix heavily critique the algorithm used to advertise content to them, and I explain how Netflix constructs Black users as Black subjects in order to keep them engaged with the platform. So a couple threads here that I think are, I mean, this is obviously talking about Netflix, but very relevant on other platforms as well. Any platform that is particularly recommendation based as opposed to activity being predominantly user led. So, I mean, Twitter currently did used to be, but they've made those changes. TikTok, another really good example of a platform that's very recommendation based. I'm sure y'all can come up with others if you have them, or if you use them, if you're familiar with them. And the reason I was particularly interested in this paper is a couple things stuck out to me. So one is that being, I am familiar with Netflix's internals and machine learning practices in as much as I have gone to a lot of their talks. I do know that Netflix is actually probably one of the companies that uses Jupyter notebooks in production most, I don't want to necessarily say aggressively, but much of their pipeline is built directly on Jupyter, or at least was the last time I got a tech talk from somebody at Netflix. And everything on Netflix is in sort of like how you interact with the platform. Everything's being A/B tested. Everything's being machine learned. The thumbnails are definitely user specific. So definitely a lot of instances or a lot of opportunities for, biased behavior to arise through these machine learning practices. And then this thing that I got, a little bit spicy about. So something we talk about a lot on the channel, especially in the linguistic context, right? Because my background's in sociolinguistics, is that it's really hard to intentionally not use a particular piece of sociological information about a person if you have a lot of information about them, right? So a great example here that you'll hear people talk about in the sociology literature is that it's possible to infer a lot about people with just the knowledge of their zip code, what are the three pieces of information? I'm forgetting the citation. If anyone remembers, feel free to throw it in the chat, but it's like zip code, phone, gender maybe. Anyway, with three pieces of information, you can make a very, very educated guess about somebody. Was it last name? Oh, wow. I don't remember anymore. I'm gonna have to go reread that paper. I told you I was tired. But if you have information to if you access to some pieces of information about somebody, which, presumably you do, if you have their Netflix account, what their username is on Netflix, you have certainly patterns of information about their watch history. Again, thinking sort of at the trivial level, what languages they tend to watch things in. So that's a piece of sociological information about a person. So even though, specific pieces of information are not elicited, like racial identity, that doesn't mean that, covariates of that are not being used in a way that, trivially means that, yes, racial identity is being used, even if it is not specifically asked for, right? You could think of this as, in machine learning terms, leakage. You could think of it as a latent variable that's affecting other variables. So pretty hard not to include this variable, even if you're explicitly trying not to. And then, this is more in sort of communication studies. Media, Culture, and Society is the journal where this was published. Not an area that I'm as well read in. It's, I don't know, I guess I dabble in it. I will occasionally read papers in it, but certainly not what my degree is in. But to sort of summarize my understanding of this last little bit, right? How does, the choices that are made by automated systems and how that affects the interplay between people and their way of being in the world, and also representations of race, which again may not be explicit, right? They may be latent, but that doesn't mean that they are not there. Because anytime you're building a model of individuals and groups of people, it's very easy to accidentally build what I like to call a social category detector. So it's very easy to accidentally build, let's say, a gender identifier, even if that's not what you intended to do. Because, people's gender affects so much of how they interact with the world and the world interacts with them. Or, race, some ethnic backgrounds, more so some ethnic backgrounds, less so what language you speak. All of those things are going to change how you show up in the world and how your life is. And then also, I think this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. Users are seeking agentic traction in these algorithmic spaces, right? They want to have an effect on what happens to them, and how their experience is in a way that centers their ability to make independent decisions and act on them, right? So interesting premise. Again, slightly beside some of the things that I've worked on, but I do have some background in some of these things. So let's dive on in. And I'm just going to sort of skim a little bit. So apologies if I'm missing anything important. Also, no one said anything in the chat yet, and I'm a little bit worried that I'm having issues because of it. Technical issues. So if someone could just say something, I would appreciate it, just so I know that it's live and the audio is coming through and everything. All right. So they're talking about this general process where some Black Netflix users noticed that they were getting thumbnails featuring Black actors. Oh, thank you. Bazil says something in the chat. I appreciate that. Glad to know that y'all can hear me. And particularly that they were being shown thumbnails of Black actors, presumably because, you know, some machine learning program somewhere found out that some people were more likely to watch movies if the thumbnail had a picture of a Black actor in it, and so they were showing some population of users thumbnails with those particular actors in them. Particularly if they were doing, I don't know that much about their like internal stack. Ite-song says they're working fine. Princess says it's working fine. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. But particularly if they're using, you know, computer vision, and again, with computer vision, even if you're not explicitly looking for something like race, it's going to be, particularly in the United States where ideas of race are very closely tied to ideas of skin color, it's going to pick up on it, right? In response to these critiques, Netflix claimed that because users are not asked about their racial identity, it is impossible to personalize the individual Netflix experience using identity markers. Stacia Brown, a podcaster and writer for the Washington Post, was one of the first to post to Twitter about what she was seeing in her Netflix account, Figure One. And she said, other Black Netflix users, does your queue do this? Generate posters with the Black cast members on them to try and compel you to watch. This film stars Kristen Bell and Kelsey Grammer, and these actors had maybe 10 cumulative minutes of screen time, 20 lines between them tops. And there is a poster for a movie, I guess, like Father, that has two Black actors centered in it. It looks like they're sitting at a table in front of some glasses, maybe? As the image shows, Brown's complaint was that Like Father featured two Black actors from the film that did not have significant roles, but were still placed in the thumbnail as a way to draw viewers in. The response from Netflix sets up the algorithm as a separate entity distinct from human subjectivity. And this is a thing that we're seeing a lot recently in the machine learning space, particularly as, you know, systems are being deployed that are having a larger societal effect. People don't like the effect necessarily, and there's I think Abeba Burhane said something about this recently, right? That, like, when things go well, the people who built the system want the credit, but when things go badly, well, you know, the system is this separate other thing that we can't possibly be held responsible for. And there's I don't know that it's necessarily intentional on people's parts, but there's a little bit of an asymmetry there in terms of how credit and blame are assigned, that feels, to me, slightly unfair, or perhaps that is being used as a way to suggest that critics are the ones in the wrong and not necessarily the people who built the system that did things that people thought were worthy of criticism. Certainly quite the rhetorical turn. Despite this claim, the fact that Black users experience being marketed to by Black actors and thumbnails reveals how race is still present within Netflix recommendation algorithm, even though the company positioned the algorithm as neutral. And like I mentioned, very hard to not build a social category detector, right? You have to be aware of what social categories are going to be relevant in your particular sociological context, and also be actively mitigating for whatever effects it is that you are trying to minimize. And you have to pick specific effects too, right? Like any data about humans, any social data is going to reflect the social belonging and understanding and identity of the people in that data. Absolutely no way to remove it, right? In the linguistic context, I like to talk about your language data is going to be in at least one language, and there's no way to sort of, I know that a lot of folks in machine translation talk about sort of like interlingual embeddings, where there's this idea that all languages can be embedded in the same embedding space. I don't really buy it. Perhaps the denotation you may get quite a way there, but with the connotation, I don't think that you're going to necessarily be able to get that, right? So even though perhaps the semantic content can be mapped between languages, I don't think the larger social understanding of the way that, you know, specific terms and words are used differently will necessarily pick up, particularly because those are things that are changing constantly, right? Good morning, Nepali Chess, welcome. I'm trying to come up with a really good example of that. So in English, we have two words that are very similar, homey and homely. They're not, homely in particular is not used super often, at least in my dialect, but they both sort of mean relating to the home. And the sort of general idea is like homey is like, oh, it's cozy, it's nice and warm, it's like a place you want to be. And homely is usually used to refer to people to suggest that they are so ugly that they should stay at home, right? So like semantically, you know, they're going to be used in different situations, but yeah, pretty similar, and even, you know, surface form kind of similar, but in terms of, you know, the connotation, right, pretty different, yes. Anyway, the big point there is that your language data is going to be in a language. Your social data is going to be about people, and there's no way to math your way out of that. So, you know, as practitioners, we got to take responsibility for that and understand the effects that that's going to have on people downstream. And if we don't, maybe we shouldn't deploy the systems. A sip of coffee. Hopefully it's not picking up the sipping sounds. I know a lot of people find mouth sounds particularly distressing. So, moving on, and I'm sure that this next thing is, going to make the exact same point. At first glance, it may seem forward-thinking that race is not represented or quantified in the data Netflix uses to make recommendations to its users. And again, it's not a feature, it's not an explicit feature that they're using, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have enough of an effect on other features that it is not latently represented in their representations. Titles to watch, niche categories, thumbnail images, etc. Race in this instance is not defined rigidly, or in fact, the case could be that it's not defined at all. In systems of the past, there was a variable called race, and Netflix avoids this type of classification. Oh, Brett says, I thought homely was a big person and not really ugly. Interesting. And for me at least, homely also doesn't necessarily need to refer to a person. Let's look it up. So this is from Oxford Languages. Of a place or surroundings, simple but cozy and comfortable as in one's home, simple and unpretentious. Of a person, unattractive in appearance. But at least that is what the definition is from the Oxford Languages. So that's probably going to be a little bit more British English focused. Let's see, the Free Dictionary, not attractive or good looking, a homely child, lacking elegance or refinement, homely furniture, of a simple or unpretentious nature, plain, homely truths, characteristics of the home or home life, homely skills. I'll write the pair that I was talking about there, homey verse homely. And it's a very subtle distinction, and particularly if you are not a native English speaker. I'm not saying you're not a native English speaker, Brett. I'm pretty sure you are. But if you were not a native English speaker and you made a mistake here, I don't think anyone would, take offense at it. They'd probably understand the confusion there. I don't know. Some people are just looking to get angry. Maybe they would, but certainly I would not be bothered at all. But yeah. Language. It's complex. All right, so they're saying, previously we would have a variable called race, so particularly with, if you had a much smaller feature space, which was much more common in, pre-deep learning zeitgeist. So even commercial systems, even today, some commercial systems just don't have that many features because they are trying to avoid accidentally picking up on race. So things like anything in the banking industry, hopefully anything in the employment industry, although, Facebook's getting in hot water because of that. We talked about that on Thursday. With the lawsuits that they had, that they were not serving, that they were not necessarily explicitly targeting trucking job advertisements to younger men and not women and not older drivers, but that was the impact. Brett says, yeah, complex. It is. It is indeed. Yeah. Netflix avoids this kind of classification where you just have a box that says race, proudly claiming that the creation of new consumer, proudly claiming the creation of new consumer categories that are, quote, post-demographic, which I don't believe. And judging by the sort of the rest of the content in the article, I would say that this author also doesn't agree with. What they are doing is clustering people together by actions. And if there are Black users doing similar things on the platform, then Blackness will still appear as an output in some capacity. Despite Netflix's claims and even their concerted effort to remove race as a variable within their systems, Blackness and racial identity more broadly emerges through the system. The lack of specificity and attention to race as a variable within the Netflix platform, ends up reproducing some of the older notions of identity that they are trying to avoid by not including it as an identity marker. And this is a super common pattern, right? Where people are like, well, we're not using X variable, so we can't possibly be biased against X. Hey, old player, good to see you. I'm glad your electricity's working today. However, very difficult to do, and in some cases some variables are going to be impossible to remove with some types of data, straight up. A good one there is very, very difficult if you have voice data to remove all markers of age, right? You can immediately tell upon hearing someone's voice whether or not they're a child. In most cases, of course, there's a variety of, people can sound different, but generally most people can guess fairly accurately whether or not a voice that they are hearing is a child's voice or not, right? So if you're collecting voice data, you are, whether you mean to or not, collecting some degree of age data. Very easy to hear from listening to someone's voice whether or not they're very old or have had a lot of aging related to particularly the vocal folds and the also tooth loss as well, right? Like you can tell from somebody's voice signal whether or not they have all their teeth, or a large portion of their teeth. It's actually pretty easy to do, unfortunately. Well, not necessarily unfortunately, it's just very easy to do. I'm sure if those of you who know folks that don't have, many teeth or any teeth, you know the sort of, you can think of the sort of sonic quality that I'm thinking of. I'm not going to mimic it because that feels a little bit disrespectful. Or even just, the voice of someone who is very old or has undergone a lot of aging. Of course, there are various, diseases and disorders that will cause people's voices to sound older. Or, does someone smoke a lot? Something you can get from their voice signal. So even if you are not intentionally collecting that information, you've got it. You've got correlates of it. Prasant says, so did Netflix collect voice data from its users? Great question. I don't know. I don't really use Netflix, but if they have a voice search feature, they might have. I was just using voice as an example of a type of data that the only way to remove that information, or to not have that information is to not have the voice data at all, period. Yeah, good question. If anyone else who uses Netflix more knows if they do collect voice data, I'd be interested to hear that. Boucher, Bucher, 2018, speaks to how algorithms ascribe meaningfulness and value through the ways they grant visibility and render relevance. But in the case of the Netflix thumbnail algorithm, what kind of blackness are they making visible? There have been a number of moments in recent years that reveal how race is misrepresented and flattened by digital technologies. In 2020, I remember this, a pixelated image of President Obama unsampled to the image of a white man. So this was for a interpolation, visual interpolation system. I want to say it might have been in Europe. I don't remember. Being generated by an artificial intelligence tool called Face Depixelizer. And you know what? In fact, we can just go look. I don't have to guess. What was it? It started with a T, right? H-T-S-N-T. Oh no, this is a Vice article. But I do remember seeing that paper. Hi, Sheikh. Ooh, Sheikh. Apologies if I'm saying her name incorrectly. It is not intentional. The photo spread on Twitter, and users were quick to call out the problem of bias in artificial intelligence and machine learning. An even earlier example of the technology sidestepping the variable of race can be found, here's Facebook again, in how Facebook implemented an ethnic affinity category as part of their ad targeting tool. Even though this category was included in the demographics category, Facebook executives stated that this was different from a racial category because the company didn't ask its users about their racial identity. Facebook has a lot of information about you. They know, what ads you've looked at, what ads you've clicked at, lots of potential to gather enough information to infer someone's race. Again, or other features, right? Like disability status, for example, whether or not they're a veteran, lots of protected characteristics, whether or not they're pregnant, that's a big one. However, in 2016, it was discovered that advertisers could exclude Black and Hispanic ethnic affinity groups from seeing their ads, and the attempt to not categorize race in more traditional ways resulted in negative outputs that were supposedly being avoided. In all these examples, race is an emergent entity as opposed to a category that is well defined, and yet community detection of race is still occurring. Machine learning accomplishes identity categorization differently than systems of the past. With older methods, there was no database available to categorize user behavior, but as contemporary digital technologies emphasize capturing patterns emerging from data, the same older, more rigid notions of racial identity are being reproduced, right? So this, this social variable is being, is emerging from the patterns in the data, right? And this isn't surprising. Like I said, your social identity affects how you show up in the world in a lot of ways. I'm trying to come up with an example that's going to apply to most people. Because one of the things that tends to happen is that whatever the group is that has the most power in a specific situation tends to be identified as the default, quote unquote. And anything that is different tends to be identified as, sort of the other, right? So there's this assumption of, people in this category are the normal people and everyone else is not normal, right? In some way. So a good example of that you've probably run into is the assumption of the male gender being the default. This was really reflected in academic writing until quite recently, and sometimes actually, honestly, board game rules, where he will be used to refer to everyone because the assumption is that the male is the default. And if you said something like, he or she or they, all those things together, he/she or they, that would be weird and different. Although I think there's quite a bit of language change in progress right now where, I say language change in progress, singular they is attested in Old English. But the sort of societal fineness with using they to refer to a specific individual, even if it's singular, of unknown gender, or of a gender where they is the pronoun that they tend to use, is perfectly fine. So yeah, I can't come up with a good example that's going to be, I think, equally relevant to everyone. So just move on. Yeah. So basically, the issue here is that, like, you know, again, a thing that happens a lot in machine learning systems, Netflix is like, hey, we're not asking for this information, but that doesn't mean that their systems aren't using this information, because they've collected so much data that it can be, even if unintentionally, inferred, right? So if we're thinking, again, let's think about gender. If I don't know somebody's gender, but I know that they went to a women's college, right? And that they played on a women's softball team, and that, you know, they visit a women's health physician, I can probably make some guesses about their gender, even without specifically asking for their gender, because I have enough other pieces of information that sort of point in the same direction that are like, maybe there's something that I can infer about this person. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just going to scroll for a bit, because I think we've sort of all gotten the general gist of the article here. So 2 key questions. What kind of blackness does the Netflix thumbnail algorithm present to users, and how are users understanding the way that Netflix uses / does not use race? Because I think the users here are like, hey, you're definitely using race. Netflix is like, no, we're not. We didn't ask about it. Much like, you know, someone might say, perhaps to a prominent machine learning researcher, hey, the thing that you have just launched doesn't do what you have claimed publicly that it does. And they can be like, oh, it does, you're just using it wrong. It feels not particularly in good faith. I don't know if you heard that. My dog just opened the door. I closed it for a reason. I don't know how to dog proof these doors. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, so different sections here: algorithms and who we are, Black studies and technological progress. And you know what? This is actually not an area that I've read a whole bunch in, so let's read a little bit about this, because I think it might be helpful for folks. So there's a lineage within Black studies that articulates Black life as a disruption of Eurocentric narratives and identity and logic stemming from the Enlightenment philosophy. King, 2009, theorizes Blackness as an interruption of, quote, the smooth flow of modern and postmodern thought on the questions of slavery and genocide. As she examines Black thought, aesthetics with an E, and politics, her project seeks to halt the all too smooth logics, not logistics, sorry, of white settler colonial studies. Ultimately, this work forces us to reckon with how, quote, the human is constructed, and how Blackness has informed this project while simultaneously being Blackness has informed this project while simultaneously being constructed as less than human. And there is a big thread of that constructing in, you know, American and European scholarship, particularly anthropology as a discipline. Big issues there that I think that at this point the discipline is certainly thinking and talking about more, and seems to be improving, but there's certainly a legacy there. And I bring up anthropology in particular because my degree is in linguistics. Linguistics has very close ties with anthropology. This line of thinking can also be found in the works of scholars like Winter with a W, and with a Y, W-I-N-T-E-R, and Hartman, who seek to philosophical and material underpinnings of how Black life is structured within the United States. Although these projects within Black studies are rooted more solidly in history and philosophy, they provide an entry point into representations of Blackness within popular culture and media texts as they encounter new digital technologies, particularly from the standpoint of technological progress being a primarily white enterprise. And this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit recently, specifically representations of Blackness within popular culture around generated images of Black folks. So there's a quote AI supermodel whose name starts with an S, and I don't remember. I apologize. Who is a digital rendering of a Black woman who is designed by and profits a white man, right? And we talked about the quote AI rapper a while ago. That was again this Black avatar quote. Using the voice of an uncredited Black rapper, but that was created and, again, profiting, I believe they were white, to developers. Or even other examples. Sorry, I warned you, I'm tired. But so this construction and representation that is divorced from the actual people who experience Blackness in a way that feels very minstrel showy. And we talked about minstrel shows in the on the channel before, but if you're not familiar, it is a sorry, I'm looking for a specific tweet to reference. Oh, I don't know how to spell it. Minstrelly. One sec. Sorry, I'm trying to look up how to spell minstrelly. But it was a form of vaudeville entertainment where white actors would use blackface, so use makeup to make themselves look black and perform, a cruel caricature of, of Blackness for the entertainment of a predominantly white audience. Minstrelsy. Minstrelsy? Yes. Sorry, the more tired I am, the more my dyslexia affects me, and yes, there we go. So the specific tweet that I was thinking about here. Oh, and I'll pop this link in the chat. Again, if any of you are interested in taking a research survey on pronouns, I talked about this right at the beginning of stream, from the University of Edinburgh. They are currently recruiting. They're currently recruiting participants. So the specific the specific tweet that I was thinking about is from JD. Go away. JD_occasionally. Quote, Black non-binary disco fairy, responding to these images of older Black women wearing sort of traditional, well, I don't actually think it's traditional, but sort of African-inspired, I would say, fashions, jumping for joy and smiling big smiles. And these are generated images. You may notice that the hands are blurred out, probably post hoc to try and make it look less horrifying, because as we all know, most generation, certainly Stable Diffusion, can't do hands very well. And the response that JD occasionally had here was AI art is modern day minstrelsy. Minstrelsy is the word I was trying to say. Oy, sorry. Struggling to say and read and write words, which is great to have on a paper reading stream. Thank you all for sticking with me. I appreciate your patience. But yes, so this is something that I have been thinking about as well, is who creates and who profits from these representations. And in this case, it's like a literal, image representation. And it tends to be not Black folks. It tends to be, I don't actually know who created these particular images or not, but certainly in the two examples that I talked about previously, it was white folks. Perhaps thinking about the history of, say, the Western Hemisphere, you can imagine why white people profiting off images of the bodies of Black folks at the expense of opportunities for those Black folks. Well, I mean, in this case, they don't exist, but is bad. It would be bad if it were not images of Black folks, but because it is extra bad. Anyway. Coffee sip. Anyway. Emergent scholarships within algorithm studies speak to how user behavior can train the algorithm to produce differences by race, even if they were not concluded in the programming of the system. Scholars such as Noble, I believe this is Sophia Noble, Benjamin, I believe this is Ruha Benjamin, and Sweeney, I think that is, yeah, I'm gonna double check. SSS. Sweeney, I'm pretty sure. You know what? I don't trust myself to say words good. I certainly don't trust myself to say words good. Names good. So I'm pretty sure it's Latanya, but I'm gonna double check. Because I don't want to say someone's name wrong. It is Latanya. I feel much better. And Latanya Sweeney, all fabulous researchers whose work I followed quite closely over the years. So I would definitely recommend them if you're interested in learning more in this general topic. Insists that user behavior can also train algorithmic systems to produce problematic outputs in the context of machine learning because of the way that machine learning is conducted. Minority engagements with technology are ultimately projects that produce different and much worse outcomes for underprivileged populations than for majority populations. I'm thinking here of what's her name? We talk about her all the time on the channel. She is from Finland, but I believe she's of Asian descent. And when she was using Lensa, the sort of AI selfie generation app, not necessarily the majority, but more than her white colleagues that were using it, of the images produced were nude or very sexualized. And all the women had far more sexualized images than their male colleagues. So again, I'm not suggesting that, women or people from Asia are, in the minority, but they have been minoritized and have had, particularly in the context of technology, their agency and involvement reduced, in some cases very intentionally, by, say, IBM in the 80s. Anyway, so it's, again, the technology is worse for people from underprivileged populations. This begs the question, is the notion of classification inherently a white enterprise? And if so, how then is Blackness conceived within this enterprise? So when I talk about not building social category detectors, I don't think you need it, right? Just like you almost never need to actually ask for or use gender for things in machine learning, right? You don't need to do it. Jim Hahn, love to see it. I'm going to assume that you are referring to this discussion and not some of the adverse effects that I mentioned. The timing of the YouTube chat is a little bit off, so I'm going to assume that's what you're talking about. Yes. This article unveils how images of Blackness in popular culture intersects with classification systems within digital technology that ultimately reveal the constantly shifting nature of Blackness. As referenced by King and others within the Black Studies tradition, Blackness is a constant interruption and disruption of the ongoing project of constructing, quote, the human, and this point becomes even more salient as Blackness encounters new digital platforms and technology. So I think that's, Jim said yes. Okay, good. I assume, I try to assume. I hope that people who watch my channel are interested in engaging critically with these topics in a respectful way. And if you're not, I will invite you to be blocked. Yes, and then sort of discussion of recommender systems, which I'm going to assume most of y'all are familiar with, so I'll just sort of skip through that. The Netflix recommender system, which is a recommender system. It uses a bunch of information about, what you've clicked on, what you've watched, how long, your ratings. They did a lot of work on using ratings and recommendation systems, and they used to have I think they were one of the first sort of major recommender systems to go from a star rating system to an up-down rating system, if I recall correctly. Perhaps some of you may recall more clearly. I mean, obviously this is used for other things, right? Like Facebook Reacts are part of recommender systems, but not necessarily a way that all users understand or is clear. Whereas, you know, thumbs upping, thumbs downing, or star ratings, I think are pretty clearly intended, and the audience generally understands, are going to change the recommendations they get. Personalized video ranker. Everyone gets, you know, personalized thumbnails. And then a discussion of this. So this is a screenshot of a news article from IndieWire by Jack Scharf, published October 23rd, 2018. Netflix accused of promoting content by targeting viewers' race, but company says that's impossible. We don't ask the members for their race, gender, or ethnicity, so we cannot use this information to personalize their individual Netflix experience, the company said in a statement, which, as we've talked about at length here, very hard not to, right? So anyway, just general discussion. Black users were noticing this, that they were being shown, you know, misleading thumbnails in that they did not show the actors who had the most screen time, but the actors who, you know, based on the recommendation algorithm, they were most likely to click on. So here at SG Brown Author says, I was disappointed. It felt like I'd been tricked by being shown a promo from The Good Cop. Yeah. Silk the Chaka Khan, again on Twitter, says, Love Actually feels egregious to me because I honestly don't even remember there being a black guy in it. I'm not super familiar with any of these shows or movies, but if you are, perhaps you have your own memories of them. Yeah, but basically, users don't like being misled about the content in a way that is designed to entice them into interacting with them, but presents an unrealistic image, literally image in this case, of what they're actually going to be engaging in, right? So I guess a similar something that I think about a lot is there's a lot of very predatory boot camps out there providing, you know, coding education that, you know, will promise, you know, everyone gets a job, and that's true, but many of the people who get a job are at the boot camp and are, you know, very poorly paid or not paid at all. Or they may say, you know, earn salaries of up to blah, but the person who earned that salary, you know, had 10 years of experience in software engineering and was just using the boot camp to learn a new language or something. So yeah, feels deceptive, right? So this is an interview with Toby Arimu, a filmmaker from Brooklyn, who responded as following. It's beyond feeling duped, he said, because if something is black, I take no offense in being catered to. I am black, give me black entertainment, give me more. But don't take something that isn't and try to present it like it is. I wonder what the makers of those shows and films think. If it were me, I'd be very upset. And I think there's a good point to be said here, is that targeted advertisement and personalized recommendation systems aren't necessarily a bad thing, right? They can make people's experience more enjoyable. They can help to target content that people are gonna pay more attention to, right? So, you know, not always necessarily. One thing about being someone who produces videos about machine learning on YouTube is that I get a lot of recommendation for content creators in the space that I have deep distrust of, let me put it that way, who I do not trust just as people and don't really want to interact with. So it's not necessarily always perfect, but it can be. On the other hand, it can also, of course, have unintended secondary effects. So we've talked on the channel before. Have we? Actually, I don't know that we have, about the study showing that particularly Facebook causes more radicalization and more extreme political content to be shown to people over time. Also an issue on YouTube as well, actually, showing more and more, extremist political content to people. And it does tend to be, in general, the effect tends to be particularly strong for right-wing and authoritarian content. Anyway, I'm making a face that you can't see because I'm thinking, again, of specific people in the machine learning community who are very happy to take credit for good things and absolutely refuse to take responsibility for bad things. Anyway, yeah, so users don't like this. So from a product design standpoint, right, even though, yes, they may have clicked on the video, you may have gotten positive signal if that's what you were trying to optimize for, like, hey, people watch these things. In terms of a larger user experience, they didn't enjoy it, right, and also felt actively deceived by the platform. And if you are, trying to retain users, which I know is a problem Netflix has right now, perhaps deceiving them even unintentionally because your metrics don't consider that may lead to bigger problems down the line, right? So this idea of perverse incentives, you're trying to optimize for something, and as a result, you get the result you don't want, right? So these users trust Netflix now less, right? They like Netflix less because they are being, they feel lied to, which I think is also very reasonable. So, yep. So, if you're interested in reading more, I think I'm gonna, I do want to read all of this, but it's a very long paper, and I do want to also get to all the other papers. I'll read this section. So this section is on algorithmic accountability and Black Twitter. So Brock 2012 speaks of Black Twitter as a, quote, social public that is highly functional due to Twitter's combination of brevity, multi-platform access, and feedback mechanisms. He reframes Black Twitter as a ritual drama and then highlights the structure, engagement, invention, and performance of these Twitter users, employing cultural touchpoints of humor, spectacle, or crisis to construct a discursive racial identity. Yes. I'm assuming that these are all of these terms are sort of like a summary of other things that are talked about in much more detail in the original article, which I have not read. The emergence of Black Twitter has become a space where Black people have found a voice and a medium by which they can speak to and against dominant power structures. Levan, 2015, speaks of Black Twitter as initially referring to the large number of African Americans using the site, but as the momentum gathered, it evolved into, quote, a news base, think tank, and digital archive, a site of counter-narratives and counter-memory, assembling supplementary information that challenges the dominant narrative propagated in traditional media. Which is, I don't know, I think something that we may lose, and it will be a poorer and less rich world for it. We'll see. Hopefully not. I don't know. Twitter. Black Twitter has become a means of accountability in this digital age, enabling people to speak out against social injustice, most noticeably police brutality. So if you're familiar with, the Black Lives Matter moment, I mean, obviously it's ongoing, and police reform is a urgent problem in the country, but it was never, right, a single centralized organization. It was always a, collective understanding and movement. Although Levan focused predominantly on police brutality and state-sanctioned violence, the principle of Twitter operating as a space to speak out against racism and injustice is still salient. When Black Netflix users took to Twitter to voice their concerns about being marketed to as a result of their racial identity, they were holding Netflix accountable, right? And there were a bunch of not-so-great news articles from it that I'm sure the Netflix PR people were not delighted to see. And perhaps it made the engineers working on these systems do some reflection and think about the effects of their design decisions. There was a wrongdoing, and regardless of who was at fault, Netflix was forced to was forced to talk to numerous news outlets, Wired, the New York Times, The Guardian, Jezebel, and others, and answer for what was happening on their platform. It is true that Netflix was not purposefully identifying users as Black to get them to spend more time interacting with the interface, but users on Twitter started, in their own way, the process of algorithmic accountability, right? So something that we talked about, right? If the automated system does something that harms users or, misleads users, even if it is an organization and not an individual at fault, it should be remedied, right? I don't know. I hope that, again, if you're coming to my channel and watching it and thinking about these things, then that's something that you also agree with, right? We don't want to build things that hurt people. We want to build things that make their lives better. And, if you're working for a company, that don't harm the company. And losing user trust, using loser trust is quite the Freudian slip there. Losing user trust is definitely a harm to the company. Thus, in this moment, Twitter galvanized news outlets to confront Netflix about an issue that was and still is a manipulative way to market products towards Black users of Netflix. Tweeting about race being included in recommendation system algorithms is not the end point of algorithmic accountability, but it is a start and a way to combat the notion that Blackness can be essentialized, flattened, and turned into a variable in an unethical marketing ploy. So yeah, I think that's a great place to start to wrap up the article. And I would say some things to think about here. This discussion, this attention, these changes did not come from within Netflix. They came from users that were upset. Go away. They came from users that were upset. And my hope for you all, and hopefully your hope for yourselves, is that as much as you can, if you're thinking proactively about the ways in which a system might unintentionally pick up on latent variables like race, like gender, like ethnicity, like national origin, perhaps some protected characteristics that you or your employer are legally required to consider, and not, there's no legal requirements about recommendation algorithms for movies, but there are legal requirements about, say, employment and recruiting, or housing ads. And if you are proactive in thinking about the ways in which latent social variables may impact the outcome of your system, or where you might unintentionally be using a metric that doesn't give you the full story, right? So in this case, if the metric was people clicked on the video, yeah, they were doing it because they were misled. But the larger metric of did people want to continue to use Netflix probably did not stay high and start high and stay high, right? And just think about it, right? Just consider it. Just make it part of your design process. It's so hard. It's so complicated. But if we are making systems that people use, we have to consider people. The whole point of the channel, right? Language, technology, and other people. Caring about them. Also, if you have not been here in a while, it used to be language, technology, and other people, but I put a little comma in there because we talk about all three sort of separately. Speaking of language and technology and other people, so this next paper is also in Media, Culture, and Society. Same journal. I didn't realize that. This one's open access. I'll post the link in the chat if you are interested in checking it out. There we go. And it's by Carolina Are, who runs the account Blogger on Poll, and talks about algorithmic accountability and related topics. So let's just start with the title and abstract, Rachel. Let's start with the first bits. And this was published December 12th, 2022. Oh, I should say this was published very recently. The first article that we talked about. If I go back, well, December 7th, so hot off the presses. All right. So situated within the field of platform governance studies, so that's the field of how people who are running platforms like, say, Twitter make decisions. Rip to the scholars who are studying Twitter. I know what that was like. This paper shows findings from a, quote, autoethnography of automated powerless. So autoethnography is a sort of archaeological nope, architectural nope, anthropological. Wow. anthropological research method where you from ideally the idea of like having a neutral stance towards things and just describing it and doing interviews and understanding the social situation. Auto self, right? So doing that for yourself. An exercise that sometimes I'll do in class with students is digital autoethnography. So you basically write down all the websites that you visit in a day and how you use them, and you know, what your social interactions on them are like, just as a way to consider your digital self. That can be a fun exercise if you are interested in it. And then automated powerlessness, I think, is what it says on the tin. Drawing from the researcher's disempowering experience of being a heavily moderated social media user. Using theoretical frameworks blending affordances and world risk society theories. Don't know about either of those theories, so we're going to learn about them together. This paper contextualizes my experience of moderation of my pole dance instructor, activist, and blogger account, Blogger on Pole, from February to October 2021 within social media's broader deplatforming of nudity and sexuality. And I believe that was the Sesta Fosta thing. Let me see if I can get the dates for that. Dates. Became law 2018. No, that's when it was voted. So Sesta Fosta was a act which purported to be an anti-trafficking act, has, to my knowledge, been used in an anti-trafficking context very rarely, if at all, and mostly has been used to target, you know, online sex workers in a way that has reduced overall safety and, speaking of unintended consequences, probably increased the amount of trafficking that's happened. Not great. Let's see, I'm trying to get the dates. I'm sure it will be discussed in the article. Response 2018, 2021. In January 2021, Judge David C. Godbey of the United States District Court, North District of Texas, upheld the constitutionality of FOSTA, I'm reading from Wikipedia here, ruling that the statute is neither unconstitutionally overbroad nor unconstitutionally vague. His ruling was a response to a constitutional challenge brought by a defendant in the case of United States versus Martano, a criminal matter relating to the seizure of City X Guide. Okay, so this would have been right after that ruling, which I'm assuming would have triggered it, perhaps. I'm sure it will be discussed. Finding fallacies within platforms' own affordances, which lack mechanisms to aid or rehabilitate deplatformed accounts. With little to no information from platforms about the details of their moderation, qualitative, ethnographic, and autoethnographic explorations of their governments are all users currently have to fight and understand the Puritan, patriarchal censorship of nudity and sexuality, which are often conflated with risk. This study concludes with recommendations for different options for better, more equal, and community-focused moderations. So I think what makes most sense for us is just to go and look at the recommendations for better content moderation, right? Any of you who have ever been involved in running an online community know that moderation is not optional if you want it to continue to be usable at all. So let's get to that section. Conclusion, maybe? Is there a subsection? So it sounds like, okay, so her Instagram account was deleted. So I'm guessing, yeah, let's go to the last section. I think that's where the discussion of the potential better options is going to be. So, conclusion, from automated powerless towards empowering users. This paper shared 2 case studies of automated account deletions on mainstream social media platforms, TikTok and Instagram, used by creators to both express themselves and conduct their business through advertising their own products and their brand partnerships. Sharing my unique experience as a, quote, freak case, an online moderation researcher with multiple experiences of censorship, I have shown the, quote, the automated powerlessness triggered by in-platform barriers that users posting nudity and sexuality face once their profiles are deleted by TikTok and Instagram. These barriers, which result in an inability to work and maintain their network in a space that is driven by visibility, are created by the platform's own affordances. Okay, so it's having your account deleted, particularly if you're in a situation where, you know, it's a big part of how you make your living, like me, right, is a huge issue. So some of the reasons why this could happen. So 1, deletions triggered by mass flagging by other accounts. So we've talked on the channel, there's a video about, I think I talked about brigading in the video about the harms of automated systems, right? So if there's a harassment campaign, and you know, a bunch of people or bots decide to flag a specific account, it may be automatically deleted. The inability to appeal when faced by repeated and targeted flagging campaigns and or mistaken content and account deletions, right? So this is in the general category of straight up sexual content, and nudity, but you can perhaps think about how this might also be negatively applied towards political activists, you know, folks in other realms as well. The inability to get directly in touch with platforms about deletions unless the user in question has friends in high places. So most people who are deplatformed have no ability to, you know, appeal it. And finally, platforms' lack of transparency in informing users about the reasons behind their deletions, preventing them from being able to, quote, improve their behaviors on their apps. So if your intent in, you know, account deletion is to create a safer, more, I don't know, the way you want it sort of community, if you're not telling people why it happened, then you're not going to get that, right? The next account they create, they're going to do the exact same thing. Automated powerlessness arises when the powers social media afford to a group, for example, platforms themselves or coalition of malicious accounts, outweigh the possibilities targeted users have to question or reverse decisions, or to rehabilitate themselves after their actions triggered by affordances. In short, an infrastructure and internal process that allow deplatforming, but not recovery or rehabilitation, are an inadequate form of governance. And I think we've seen this, especially recently with Twitter as well, right? Where accounts that were banned for specific violations of Twitter's terms of service have been reinstated without having addressed those the problem in the first place, and that other accounts that have not violated the terms of service have been banned for question mark, perhaps political reasons, perhaps making fun of that person we don't talk about because he doesn't need any more attention, which is, you know, a choice that platform owners can certainly make, but makes the platforms themselves less usable. So this is a quote, I guess. Okay, yes, this is a quote. This is consistent with Schoenbeck and Blackwell's argument that platform governance, quote, relies on obfuscated processes of content moderation that have little transparency or accountability to all involved parties. Content is deleted without leaving any visible trace of its removal. Policy violators have little opportunity for recourse and may not even be informed of the specific rule they have broken. Reporters receive generalized responses that often don't reference the content in question, if they receive a response at all, right? So again, thinking about managing online communities, account deletion is a tool to prevent specific types of, you know, bad behavior. But if you don't tell people what the bad behavior was, right, and you don't have any way to think about this restoratively, have them, you know, change their behavior and, you know, be reinstated for it, then that's an issue. And of course, doing that is going to be more expensive for platforms, which is why they don't do it. And unfortunately, it is also a situation that is ripe for abuse by bad actors, which is what Carolina's experienced. This opacity is particularly evident in cases where malicious reporting might have taken place, and since platforms are not compelled to honor the flags they receive, but they can use them to legitimize the removal of potentially problematic content and to reframe the removal as performance of, quote, listening to the community. The problem faced by users posting nudity and sexuality show that platforms like TikTok and Instagram view the presence of users posting nudity and sexuality as inherently problematic and risky, creating power imbalances between those in charge of identifying risks and users not considered worthy of protection and or existing in their servers. And something we talked about on Thursday, particularly with regards to sexual images, is if they are posted in a forum where that's an acceptable type of content, right? And it's done consensually by the people who created the images in the first place, that's fine. Right, and of course you don't, I'll say of course, and I would say that, within different sort of cultural milieux, different groups of people are going to have, strongly differing opinions about where this content should and shouldn't occur. But just outright banning it across all platforms has strong potential for negative effects, particularly on particularly marginalized people, including sex workers, right? So that was the outcome of SESTA and FOSTA, is because platforms just removed content. And this includes sort of a lot of this was done with automated tagging, right? And we've talked about today, actually, the interplay of race and sexualization, where, people of certain ethnicities are just tagged as being more sexual, even in a very neutral setting. There's a study for that I don't know the citation to off the top of my head. Let me know if you're interested. I can try and scrounge it up. I want to say it was at FACT. I vaguely remember seeing it. But that's going to have a disproportionate effect on, in particular, Black and Asian users, and particularly Black and Asian women, right? And one of the big outcomes of SESTA and FOSTA is that because sex workers were no longer able to, have the same access to online spaces for coordinating with people, they had to do it in person, which is much more dangerous, and as a result resulted in a lot more violence towards sex workers. Not great. As argued by this paper's adoption of world risk society theory to automated account deletions and confirming, R.A. and Passanen's, this is the same first author, Passonen, that looks like Dutch, I'm not even going to try, argument that nudity is, for platforms, problematic as such. And while safety on social media platform is an important issue, it begs the question, safety for whom? If we understand safety as protection from harm and the opposite of risk, platforms, their governors, and their stakeholders are pushing for more content removals, too often overlook another key aspect of safety, which is the ability to access and successfully participate in a society which is becoming increasingly digital. Therefore, towards fair governance, this paper suggests tackling these users' sense of, quote, automated powerlessness in the face of online moderation can be mitigated with 3 updated processes. 1, improve transparency. At present, users do not receive direct and specific information about their account's deletion and or shadow banning, meaning they often have to rely on, quote, algorithmic folklore to explain a phenomenon platformers deny. Oh, I actually saw a discussion of this recently on, I don't use TikTok, but TikTok users apparently will self-censor words, right? So they may use the phrase, quote, unalive, and the suggestion here was that because using specific words would cause your content not to be recommended. But I believe it was a Washington Post study that found that that was not the case. But there's this sort of, again, quote, algorithmic folklore that is being, spread organically throughout the user base, and as a result people are changing their behavior because of the believed behavior of the platform, because they're not being communicated with clearly, right? By providing a higher, more personalized level of detail about a creator's account deletion, users can be armed with more information when attempting to appeal platform's decision, and can learn to better adhere to platform's guidelines, right? And if that's your goal, then if you want people to adhere to your guidelines, you should communicate more and not less. 2, recognition of malicious flagging as a form of online abuse. We talked about brigading before. Each time I've discussed my experiences with Instagram and TikTok, I receive outright denials that malicious flagging was taking place, when comments underneath my post proved otherwise. Platforms should recognize creators' vulnerability to mass flagging and the impact this practice has, particularly on activists and creators posting nudity and sexuality. This vulnerability should be taken into account when moderating content, which I strongly agree, right? And that, particularly if your job is platform moderation and considering malicious users, I think not considering how malicious users might maliciously misuse the tools that you create to address the problem, it sounds like an oversight. And 3, investment in, quote, deleted creators' communication teams. My inability to reach out to a dedicated Instagram or TikTok moderator to help me recover my account or understand what led to its deletion betrays a lack of care for some of the platform's main audiences and customers. A team dedicated to supporting creators with more than generalized regurgitations of community guidelines would result in better experiences on platforms and in less instances of account deletions that threaten social networks' own image. And of course, this is a challenging thing to do. It's going to be expensive. It's going to require, enough nuance and care and social knowledge that you're probably going to need humans to do it. But, again, if you're interested in creating a stable, healthy community, you got to do the moderation, right? Like, you can't get around it. Anyway, I think very solid recommendations from someone who not only studies these systems, but also has been negatively impacted by these particular problems. Brett says, TikTok does that. One reporter of police misconduct uses the word grape to get around their content filter when pointing out problems with police not being fired for their bad behavior. Right, but I guess my question is it clear that the content filter actually is targeting those things? And if so, why? And I mean, I think TikTok has a lot less accountability towards users and perhaps more accountability towards third-party stakeholders than some other, social media accounts. So they may be intentionally not being very clear, but, I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, let's read a book. We're not reading the whole book. So this is a book that was copyrighted. Oh, it was copyrighted 2020. Interesting. Brett says they've had issues in the past without the personal filter. Interesting. So this is somebody doing A/B testing on their own content. Interesting. Yeah, like I said, I don't really use TikTok. I don't really study TikTok. So perhaps a TikTok scholar would be able to provide a little bit more information there. Let me actually find that Washington Post article. I'm pretty sure it was the Washington Post. And of course, moderation may be tuned at an account specific level as well, right? So maybe the Washington Post and words just has more affordances than other platforms. Sorry, I'm searching. Okay, so it sounds like some words are just filtered. Ugh. So much of this content is auto-generated. So much of this content, sorry, I'm trying to find something specific. And what I'm getting is a bunch of GPT-3 SEO bait. Well, I can't find it. And I'll look for it later. Also, it may have been a while ago, and things definitely change on platforms all the time. Brett says, moderation is a super hard topic and can be very toxic for moderators, so getting a machine to take some of that load off of humans. Right, but who... Yes, right, so this is, let's go back to this one. ChatGPT is getting that, oh, I'm sure it's just GPT-3, or, maybe not even GPT-3. It's extremely disjointed. Y'all, have you ever found gotten served a bunch of search results that just include stuff that is straight up ripped from Wikipedia on their own site? It's in the same vein, right? The reason that I think that it's generated is that there's a bunch of, it's in a Q&A format. The formatting is inconsistent, and the, all of the questions and answers are only vaguely related. Actually, this may just be like scraped and copied and pasted from other sites as well, but there's inconsistent. Yeah, this is clearly not human written content, let me put it that way. Or if it is, it was written by a bunch of other humans and just sort of scraped and squished together for this this website. Brett says, sorry, ADHD all over the place. Clickbait content for search hits. Yep. It's getting really bad. I don't know if you all have noticed, but certainly some of the things that I've tried to find recently, the majority of the first page has been unusable. Frustrating. Very frustrating. Yes. Tumblr book. Yay! So this is actually, this is from the University of Michigan Press as well. I'm not intending to have a bunch of stuff from the University of Michigan. It is just the case. What's Caroline's? Carolina's affiliation is with Northumbria University in the UK. So this is a book on JSTOR. It's from the University of Michigan Press. It is open access, so you can check it out. And it is about Tumblr, which is another social media site. I don't know, there were a couple papers that I wanted to read this week, and I thought we'd talk about them all together. And there's a bunch of different sections. So introduction, you must be new here. Lost in the quote dash, how Tumblr fosters virtuous cycles of content and community. So one thing I do know about Tumblr is that it does not use recommendation algorithm on the quote the dash, the sort of the main feed that people have. I believe what you see is chronological, right? So newest first, and it is things that have been reshared by people that you follow, and that is it. So you don't see things that have been liked by people that you follow. I think they have recently added an option for sort of exploring that does use content recommendations, but it is not the main way of interacting with your dash, right? So sort of similar to the way the Twitter feed used to be, right? It's just retweets and tweets from just people you follow chronologically. Chapter 3, going down the rabbit hole, an interview with Amanda Brennan, head of content, insights, and social on Tumblr. Ooh, that sounds very interesting. We may look through that one really quick. Chapter 4, Blackout, Black Excellence, Black Power, Strategies of Everyday Online Activism on Black Tumblr. So you've heard of Black Twitter, Black Tumblr. Analyze the discursive practices of one network of Tumblr users, Black Tumblr, and the strategies they use to engage in what I term everyday online activism. In contrast to the collective activism campaigns of Twitter, Black Tumblr users are not striving towards a single shared tangible goal, e.g. policy reform, etc. Brett says, I see Tumblr mentioned as an alternative to Twitter for people who want to have content have a chance to go viral, which Mastodon doesn't do. Yeah, you'll see viral Tumblr posts. I mean, if we get sort of the same, whether or not Mastodon content goes viral, I think is going to be more an effect of the size of the social network on Mastodon rather than the platform itself, right? I believe Tumblr does have a larger user base than Mastodon. Let's actually see. Tumblr monthly active users. They may or may not share this information publicly. Let's see. Swear to God, if this is all generated content. Okay, no, this one is not. It was bought by YouTube. Total number of blogs, 496 million. That's not the question that I'm asking for. Number of Tumblr users in the United States, 23.2 million. This is from Statista.com, which I believe is a data aggregation site that sells data, and that's how they make money. Here we go. Monthly Tumblr active users in the United States, 16.74 million. And I don't know that we're actually going to be able to get that information from Mastodon, but maybe. And the figure that I'm looking for is monthly active users, which is sort of the general metric that a lot of social media sites will keep an eye on. Android Authority, that's a real website. Does it say how many monthly active users they have? Mastodon currently boasts over 1 million active users, so about a 16th of the reach of Tumblr currently. And while I think this is interesting, I don't especially want to read literature on discursive practices. Not because it's bad, just because it's outside of my interest area. Under the Radar, a conversation about Tumblr in the public sphere. Okay, so it's an interview, reblogs, monsters, and erotic amphibians, the process of critical analysis on Tumblr. Interesting. Divine Fools and Ridiculous Mystics, Tumblr humor as an act of defiance, Tumblr Time, how Tumblr's temporal features shape community memory and knowledge, and then Privacy and Ethics. Okay, this I think is going to be more interesting to us. Screaming into the Void, reconceptualizing privacy, the personal and the public through the perspectives of young Tumblr users. On September 23rd, 2016, which marked the annual observance of Bisexual Visibility Day, a young woman posted a selfie on Tumblr in which she wore a shirt in the colors of the bisexual pride flag and displayed a rough facsimile of the flag drawn on her shoulder. She smiled widely in the photo, but below the image was the caption that read, "I'm still closeted offline, do not share." What a story. The challenges of doing qualitative research on Tumblr, experience and advice from 3 scholars of young people's Tumblr use. So if you're interested in doing work on Tumblr, that might be a good resource for you. We Are More Than Footnotes, Black Women and Intellectual Theft by Aisha Mahmood, M-A-H-M-U-D. I'll just read the first little bit here. When I opened up my Tumblr inbox one day in 2015, I found an ask from an anonymous follower thanking me for my blog commentary on racism and noting it was the inspiration for them finally finishing their master's thesis. I was shocked. It wasn't due to any flattery either. I initially thought, yes, finally, I'm getting some recognition for my own opinions in the ongoing conversation about racism in my daily lives. I thought I was going to finally join the ranks of more seasoned activists and feminists and finally get myself a seat at the grown folks. It trails off there, but it probably says table. Not safe for work. I believe, yes, so it discusses here, upon its abrupt elimination by Verizon in December 2019, until its abrupt elimination by Verizon in December 19, porn was a significant part of Tumblr's users' practice and central to its politics of free expression. Although the contributors here note the immediate impact of Verizon's 2017 takeover, its introduction of a, quote, new safe mode, their essays were all completed before 2018's total ban. So in 2018, all not safe for work content was removed from Tumblr. Now, in its shadow, the pieces in this section again gain an extra layer of meaning, standing as a time capsule that captures the many dynamic ways porn and other not safe for work content provided pleasure and made meaning on Tumblr. So you may notice 2018 total ban, and what were the dates for, I think it was 2021? Yeah, 2021 that Blogger on Poll also struggled. So if you want to, discuss content around sexuality, can be very difficult to find a platform online. Lots of discussions about that. Oh, I wonder if Carolina had one in here. I'm just scrolling, looking at things. Section on fandom. Just sort of a section, a subject I know a little bit about. I know some scholars working on it. In particular, Casey Feisler, F-I-E-S-L-E-R, works on digital technology and fandom, if you're interested. Oh, does she have a paper in here? No, but if you're interested in following a scholar that I also follow, might be a good introduction. Activism. So here's an interview with the lead for, excuse me, the lead for social impact on Tumblr. Tumblr XKit and the XKit Guy towards an extended platform ecology. On April 9th, 2015, Tumblr user RuneStele, S-T-E-L-E, posted a fictitious exchange between the platform's users, its technical staff, and an open source coder popularly known as the XKit Guy. This long-running Tumblr meme illustrates users' frustrations with the platform's frequently infuriating updates. Moreover, it connotes reverence for the XKit Guy, the creator of XKit, an unofficial user modification mod framework, if you want to know what mods are, that allow users to fine-tune and safeguard their experience on the platform by manipulating Tumblr's ... interface. I don't know how that was going to finish. Digital decolonization, reclaiming Tumblr's Latina tag. So I think that's interesting as well. Sort of a discussion of open source developers in this community, and open source developer. Yeah, just reading through here. I want to see if there's any that are going to be, again, particularly relevant for us. Aesthetics. This is a long book. Okay. So let's look at these two that I think are would be particularly interesting for us. So this first one is make big. I don't think I can make this big without ruining the way it's set up, and it's a little bit blurry for y'all, so apologies. So it's a discussion with Amanda Brennan, interviewed by Allison McCracken. Dates February 22, 2017 and June 20th, 2017. So this would be after it was sold back. So Tumblr was famously sold to, I think, for Verizon for a lot of money, and then they sold it back to the original owners for much less money, as I recall. I don't remember all the details, but basically, so it's a discussion with Amanda Brennan, who is Tumblr's internet librarian and currently leads its content and social teams. She has an MLIS, so Masters of Library and Information Science from Rutgers University. She began her career at Know Your Meme, researching the history of internet phenomena and niche subcultures. She's been at Tumblr since 2013, so at that point it would have been 4 years, where she spearheads its Fandometrics, Tumblr's weekly ranking of entertainment fandoms on the platform. She has spoken about internet history on conferences across the US, with topics ranging from Slender Man to cat videos, the latter of which she discussed on BBC's Forest documentary, How to Go Viral. She lives in New Jersey with her spouse and their 3 cats. So I'm just going to flip through here and see if there's anything relating to some of the topics that we've talked about around particularly moderation. So let's see. Asking if Tumblr is a youth platform. Brennan says, the fiercest Tumblr users I know are in their 30s, and that may be because I'm in my 30s, so a lot of people I know have been on Tumblr for 10 years with me. Tumblr gets talked about as a social justice platform. Do you also see it that way? Brennan, Tumblr has really empowered people whose voices are otherwise marginalized and given them a place to find their community and build their own kind of world. If you Google non-binary, for example, Tumblr is often one of the top results. Black Tumblr is another great example, and the Blackout is an amazing movement started there. Because people are coming here to discuss what they're most passionate about, social justice is part of that conversation, and people are celebrating this part of themselves. This feels very corporate-y. I'm sure she's being I'm going to assume that she's being sincere here, but this also sounds very marketing-y. Yeah, also, I don't think I've previously seen discussions of Black Tumblr to the degree that I have seen discussions of Black Twitter. So I'm wondering if there was sort of a change in progress there in terms of community demographics, question mark? Discussion of fandoms, again, not something I've read very deeply in. Tumblr fans and fan practices, so again, not something I've read very deeply in. User insights through tagging data. Now this is interesting, sort of the metadata around various posts. So interviewer McCracken says, what is fandometrics? Brennan, the quote, pleasantly scientific rankings of fandom on Tumblr. I wonder if this is a thing that exists now. Let's see, fandometrics. It's a nice portmanteau, I will give them that. There's a Twitter account. There's, it looks like a Tumblr account, fandom.tumblr.com. There's a year in review. Okay, I don't know that it's still called, okay, it is Fandometrics. Is it still, so the year in review here was 2012. Yes, all right, so this is still a thing that exists. It is fandom.tumblr.com/tag/week_in_review. I'll pop the link in the chat if you are interested. Yeah, will that work? Maybe. You'll find out, I guess. Yes. So we take different entertainment categories and gather all the engagement across searches. So this is what I was particularly interested in. What metrics are they using? What metadata? All engagement, so probably liking, reblogging, and I guess adding tags, adding comments. Can you comment on Tumblr posts? Could you comment on Tumblr posts in 2017? I do not know. Across searches, original posts, reblogs, and likes that happen in a 7-day window, and we measure them and rank them. Fandometrics is the first data analysis system on Tumblr. I was actually hired specifically to work with tag data in 2013. Before that, there was no quantitative analysis. We had top blogs and user-assigned topics. You would tag your blog with whatever it was about, and it would populate the directory. When I first started, I was just hand-reading spreadsheets and manually assigning topics, but I had a JavaScript program I use now, and it knows all the tags from doing it for so long. I just put the data in, and Monday it spits out a list. Oh, JavaScript. Not the language I would have used for this, but also I am not a librarian. So, does Fandometrics measure all Tumblr users or just fans? The tagging that I work with is all of Tumblr. When it comes to these data sets, it's like, here's a tag, here's a number, which is good and bad. I can't say 20% of all Americans talk about this thing. It's more just, here's the volume around one specific tag. Okay, so it's the number of times a specific tag was used. It's challenging in the case of fandom because some fandoms use a lot of tags and others don't. Fandometrics is more a measurement of one specific tag than the whole taxonomy of a show. In thinking about Supernatural, for example, tags relating to the show appear in multiple categories across the taxonomy system. Steven Universe is another one. Some fandoms really know how to tag and some fandoms don't, whether it's because they don't want to or don't know how to tag properly. I would say, you know, in as much as tagging is an emergent social behavior, I would say that this is tagging properly as judged by the platform owners. For example, people are constantly using GIFs from Parks and Recreation in the office, but not tagging them. So only once in a while they'll show up in the data. As someone who sometimes uses GIFs in a social media setting, I would say, or GIFs, you know, pick your delight. When I use particularly a reaction GIF, I am not referencing the show, right? It is not because I'm a fan of the show. It is because I am attempting to elicit or relate to a specific emotion or feeling or topic. When you look at the raw data set and Steven Universe and Blackout are up there in the context of each other, I think it says so much about the community. Tumblr data is going to look totally different than a Nielsen rating. It shows the multifaceted nature of Tumblr users. You can see this in what trends day to day in the app as well, which range from the standard entertainment fare to the latest K-pop news to whatever is going on in politics on that day. Tumblr really allows someone to lean into their fandom and the social issues they care about in the same breath at similar volumes and with the same veracity. Okay, so the reason that they're interested in tracking interest in specific shows is, I am assuming, to create value for content producers and convince them that Tumblr is a good place to, interact with their fan base and learn more about what's successful and what's not. Okay, so we're gonna talk about deduplication now. What if a post for one show has a lot of different tags? Brennan, most of what's in Fandometrics is just one specific tag for the show. So if you tag something Dean Winchester, a supernatural character, that doesn't get rolled up into the supernatural tally, because when people tag supernatural, they will tag supernatural, SPN, Dean Winchester, Sam Winchester, Castile. Castiel, again, see figure 3.1. If we put all those tags in the supernatural count, we would be counting that one post 6 times. So because we can't duplicate like that, we just pick the best tag. Sometimes there isn't one definitive tag, so in the raw data, we'll have both SPN and supernatural, and whichever is used more in that week will be counted, and the other one will be taken out. Wow, that is an approach to deduplication. I think what I would do here, Brett says, Jeff drinks gin while making GIFs. Yes, I pronounce it as GIF, I'm guessing. Interesting. So I think what I would do with this particular, I treat this as a topic modeling and clustering problem, right? Which would definitely be harder and more computationally intensive. Because I'm assuming that, the tags are treated in a database in a way that is fairly simple to query. Also, she's using JavaScript, so I'm guessing that doing something a little bit fancier with NLP would be pretty challenging. If any of you do NLP development in JavaScript, let me know. I don't think also in 2017. Interesting choice of strategy. McCracken says, how does your team locate more obscure fandom? So great question. How do they discover new categories that are not included in their clusters? It's a lot of related tags, and a lot of it starts with the users tagging it accurately. When you search for something and the results show you 5 related tags, in our backend, we can see 30. If something weird pops up, we'll say, let's explore this. Let's see what people are saying. Oh, I actually wanted to do this. People sometimes, oh my God, this reader is awful. I'm not having a good user experience. People sometimes use sentence tags as a way to express themselves. So if a post goes viral and the original post had the sentence tags on it like, OMG, this is the best post of all time, that tag will end up in our data set and we'll find out what that tag goes back to. Oh, okay. So I guess every time a post is reblogged, shared, tumbled, I don't know, then that tag, whatever tags were on the original post, will be counted as well. Also, this use of sort of like meta commentary and not just metadata in the tag suggests that any sort of topic modeling would be fairly challenging because there's going to be a much richer space. I'll just do a reverse search to find the post because it gives us more information about what is going viral in the community. You'll go down these rabbit holes and you'll find something like the movie Sausage Party, a 2016 computer animated film about grocery store shelf food that talks, starring Seth Rogen as a talking sausage. Okay, this is a very small fandom for the movie, and if they do food sonas, a play on personas, which are visuals of talking food in the style of the movie. When we found that, I couldn't believe it was real, but there are people who draw talking burgers. There are also fandom communities that I know are out there because of tagging, and I always want to find out a way to put them out there. A good example of how we did this was with WWE fandom, which is a huge fandom on Tumblr. We put a post on Fandometrics about the community, and then it was reblogged as staff. Everyone follows staff, Tumblr follows it for you, and then we tagged it. We put it up on a Tuesday because wrestling airs Monday nights. Usually it airs twice a week, but sorry. So Tuesday, people would be looking for wrestling content. So Tuesday, people would be looking for wrestling content. Tuesday people is not a thing. I guess it's everybody today. We're all Tuesday people. A whole bunch of the wrestling blogs reblogged our post, and that's how it grew. It received this wildly positive sentiment where fans were like, oh, Tumblr knows we're here. There's a whole reblog train of our post on one of the most popular wrestling blogs. They were so happy to be appreciated that staff then ended up reblogging the reblog train, and there was a whole conversation. Interesting. All right, so I don't necessarily want to read this whole article, but I think that was really interesting. It kind of feels like... if you remember, there was a Twitter trend a while ago called overly honest research methods, where people were just honestly sharing how they were interacting with their data and doing things. And this felt like a very honest discussion of how, a single person, a small team was interacting with a very large user base, trying to, help communities find each other and bring together otherwise insular or isolated groups of users. So interesting, very interesting. We still have 2 more papers after this one. Interesting. I think I'm just gonna post the link to this one if you're interested in reading it. It's about the community relationship with a specific open source developer who builds this particular mod. What's a blod? I told you, the tireder I get, the harder language becomes for me. So if you're interested in reading, I've shared the link there. And do keep in mind that these are all from a little bit ago, so it's probably not going to be as relevant today necessarily. The book itself was published in 2020, and it seems like a lot of the articles were written several years before that, as is the way of academic books. So I don't have the precise date for this chapter, but keep it in mind. It'll be from a little bit longer ago. All right, archive. Let's do it. Oh yeah, where's the Hugging Face integration? Is it in the paper? Is this one of the ones that has the Hugging Face integration? Y'all remember talking about that recently? The Hugging Face had an integration with archive. I don't see it. I don't see it in this sidebar here either. Anyway, this is an archive paper. And actually, you know what I should do is I should double check if this has been published anywhere. So I'm just gonna go to Google Scholar and search the title. And of course, Google Scholander. What's a Scholander? And of course, Google Scholar indexes archive. So, well, so it looks like this one hasn't been. Let's just open the PDF and see if they have any information in here about submission, etc. Work during done, internship at Google Research. So it's using the ACL format. Is it exactly 8 pages? No. Okay, so this is not a submission version because this is way too long for a submitted paper. It's how many? There's no page numbers, so I guess too bad for us. Okay, here we go. So it's 14 pages. So short ACL papers are 4 pages, long papers are 8 pages. This may be one of them their publication by press releases. Let me do a quick little bit of extra research. So I found out about this because someone suggested we read it in the last... hey, Alexi, good to see you. Someone suggested that we read it in the last stream on Thursday, and I don't remember who, so apologies. If it was you, please shout out in the chat. I'm just looking to see if anyone has written any news articles about it. And I believe to push to archive, you do in fact need to have a verified email. So it seems likely that this is who it says it's by. Interesting. I'm trying to find like any other references to this this paper online besides arXiv, and I'm having a hard time. Interesting. Okay. So I'm guessing this is just publication by press release. There was at least one intern. I have 4th author though, so probably not that this was like an intern project and they tried to push it out so they'd have an easier time finding a job. Interesting. Okay. So this may be flag planting. It might be them saying, hey, we've done this at this point in time. Can't scoop us. We scooped ourselves, that sort of thing. All right, so the paper is RARR, Researching and Revising What Language Models Say Using Language Models, by many authors. The first author is Liu Gao, G-A-O, from Carnegie Mellon. And the second author is Zhuyan Dai from Google Research. And there are many other authors. I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to read all these names. Apologies. Lead contributors. How are there that many first authors? Okay, so they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of the 11 authors say that they are lead contributors. So I guess I'm going to read them all. Hanupong Pasupat. Again, apologies. Anthony Chen, Arun Tejasvi, Shaganti, Yicheng Fan, and Kelvin Gu with 2 U's, G-U-U, are all lead contributors. My goodness, I know, that's a lot of authors, huh, bud? Abstract. Language models, LMs. I would probably say large language models here, not just language models, because the language models is a whole field of research before the Transformers paper. And I don't think that I necessarily would call, not the Transformers paper, the BERT paper. I don't know that I'd necessarily draw as tight of a, connection between the pre-BERT language models and the transformer-based language models. However, language models now excel at many tasks such as few-shot learning, question answering, reasoning, and dialogue. People have used them for that. However, they sometimes generate unsupported or misleading content. Yes, that is very true. A user cannot easily determine whether the outputs are trustworthy or not because most language models do not have any built-in mechanism for attribution to external evidence. Sorry, he's barking. Probably somebody had the gall to walk near the house. How dare. Bow, wow, 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 wow. Interesting. So I have kind of a question mark towards the way the sentence is structured because here's the problem, right? Users cannot easily determine whether the outputs are trustworthy or not. True. And then they're claiming that the reason that that is the case is specifically because language models do not have any built-in mechanism for attribution to external evidence. I mean, if this is a solution, it's not necessarily the only solution. And also, the attribution is helpful to the degree to which the external evidence is trustworthy, which, given that the data that these models were trained on is a huge hodgepodge. There's this discussion, there's in experimental work, there's something called a He's so loud. Wait for him to be done. Okay. There's this idea called a sample of convenience, which is here is the sample of all of the data that I have that it was easy for me to get. And usually people are a little bit more upfront about it in other fields than they are in NLP necessarily, but I would very much call it a sample of convenience. Is it big? Yeah, sure. Does it include a lot of untrustworthy information? Also, yes, very much so. I mean, I don't know for sure what data they're planning to train on or what model they're using. I would guess, since it's from Google Research, probably BERT. But if Google had curated a huge but also carefully curated data set, Brett says, wah, wah, wah. Yes, indeed. Dog emojis. I imagine they would not be keeping the facts to themselves, because that would be an enormous boon to the field. And even if they weren't allowing it for general use, they could certainly still sell a model trained on it for a much higher price than a model trained on a much less reliable data set would be. They could charge more, basically. So I don't think they'd keep that to themselves. To enable attribution while still preserving all the powerful advantages of recent generation models, we propose RAR, retrofit attribution using research and revision. A system that, one, automatically finds the attribution for the output of any text generation model. Oh, really? Any of them? Including ones trained on text that's not on the internet? Oh, well, that's cool. That's a good trick. Sorry, if you make claims like any, that is a strong claim. I think that their ideas about the set of text generation models is particularly, perhaps not as wide as the set of actual models. 2, post edits the output to fix unsupported content while preserving the original output as much as possible. When applied to the output of several state-of-the-art language models on a diverse set of generation tasks, we found that RAR significantly improves attribution while otherwise preserving the original input to a much greater degree than previously explored edit models. Furthermore, the implementation of RAR requires only a handful of training data, a large language model, and standard web search. Aha! You may know Google as a company that provides a web search tool. Anyway, they're just talking about various systems and how people are using them, how people are using large language models and, quote, other text generation models. Despite these incredible advances, state-of-the-art text generation models still frequently produce biased, misleading, or unsupported content, colloquially called hallucinations. To trust the output of a text generation model, we would like each generation to be justified by an attribution report that contains one or more pieces of supporting evidence from a trusted source, e.g. encyclopedia or articles where appropriate. So I think that makes sense, right? That your source should be, generally agreed upon trusted source. If I had to guess, the encyclopedia here is probably going to be Wikipedia. Just if I had to guess. Yes. I don't know. The framing here is very weird. It's not weird. The framing here is very common. But it's sort of like, hey, these models can do so many things, but whoopsie, they can't do this even though they can do other things, when the thing that they can't do is a thing that they've never been trained to do, right? That's never been the core premise of a language model. It's a little bit like saying, my hammer can hammer so many nails, but it's not great at planing and making wood smooth. You can kind of use it for that task, but it doesn't work great, which is like, yeah, of course, it wasn't designed for that. The fact that it can kind of make wood smooth in a way that may or may not be useful to you in a specific situation doesn't mean that it's a general purpose tool. Y'all know me. I'm a little bit of a large language model skeptic. But I will admit, if I had a language model output where every factual piece of output had a citation, and if those citations were consistently reliable and correct, I'd probably be much more willing to trust the output of a large language model. So if this is, robust, and also they have considered, possible sources of adversarial data injection, then yeah, I'd be more likely to trust the output, yeah. Might also be helpful as a way to do generation that is linked to specific databases, right? So a big problem with, ChatGPT is like, you can talk to ChatGPT and like, hey, I haven't used the system, but I would assume, or just a language model in general. Hey, I want to order 16 kilos of green coffee to roast. And you can have a conversation where it sounds as if, yes, you have correctly ordered 16 kilos of green coffee to roast. it's not actually going to do that for you, right? And if you had a, you know, a commercial chatbot setting, if you had a chatbot that said, oh yeah, we definitely have 16 kilos of green coffee, when you in fact had no kilos of green coffee, because it just sort of was saying something statistically likely, you would probably be upset. It would be a bad time for you. So yes, anyway, discussion about retrieval augmented models. It sounds like there's been some previous work on it, some of it by authors who are working on this paper as well. So it seems like part of a continuing research program. They first retrieve a document and then condition on it to generate text. While this often improves end task performance, it does not necessarily guarantee attribution. For example, previous work has shown that retrieval augmented models generate text that either includes additional information not present in the retrieved documents. I remember seeing this study, ignores the document altogether, or even contradicts the document. 3 citations there. In fact, occasionally ignoring or overriding retrieved arguments can make RAMs more robust to bad retrievals. Wait. Okay, so the argument here is that the fact that sometimes the model ignores the document that it's returned can be good. For example, in language modeling, semantic parsing, or tasks requiring creativity, illustrating that end task performance and attribution are not always aligned. Okay. But then, see, the reason that I would be interested in a system that had attribution is to increase trust. But if I can't, like, the big problem for me with large language models is that, oh, Brett says I asked ChatGPT about ordering 4 tons of green coffee to roast. Yeah, let me know how that went. Okay, yeah. Brett says, I'm sorry, but as a large language model trained by OpenAI, I'm not able to provide information. Right, so OpenAI had specific safeguards about stuff. You can also, I think if you ask for people's contact information, you'll hit a filtering system, which is good. I'm glad that they've done that. I'm glad that they thought about that. But the fact that it responded with that is due to the fact that OpenAI put on specific safeguards, and not because the model is incapable of generating that information. Right, so if you had access to another large language model without those safety gating features, it would absolutely continue to have, you know, that. It would absolutely tell you that you could, right? Or would have a discussion that made it seem as if it was possible to purchase something, when in fact it wasn't. Yes, so my big problem with large language models, as, you know, as someone working in language technology, is they're just not reliable, right? That's not true. They will reliably, that's also not true. I was going to say they'll reliably produce fluent sounding text, but they won't necessarily, right? You'll get the repetition errors, you'll get the blank responses, you'll get, you know, depending on how much tuning you've done and what the specific thing is that you're trying to do, you will run into issues. And a system that sometimes doesn't do what you want it to do in a very opaque way is a nightmare. I don't want to build with that. My God. Maybe y'all do. Maybe you have more tolerance for risk than I do, but particularly if I'm dealing with user data or creating something user phrasing, my tolerance for that sort of risk and very frustrating behavior is low. Anyway, and they are building on the fact-checking community, where simple research and revise workflows are increasingly effective in attributing and or correcting unattributable claims made by people. Okay, so the automated fact-checking. Someone mentioned automated fact-checking recently on the channel. Not a field that I have worked or read in. Instead of constraining TGMs to generate attributed text, we provide a model-agnostic approach to improve the attribution of existing TGMs. Retrofit attribution using research and a revision. Okay, so any here, the model-agnostic is why they would claim any. Hi, Corona, welcome. RAR first generates text using any TGM, then does research to retrieve relevant evidence, and finally revises the text to make it consistent with the evidence found, while ideally preserving qualities like style, structure, or argumentation, enabling the revised output to be seamlessly used in place of the original. This can be viewed as a RAM where retrieval happens after generation rather than before. So why do you need the language model? You need the language model to generate the text in the first place. And I guess the language model is handling the relevance part, because presumably the text that it's generating is statistically similar to the text that the human written text would have produced in a similar situation, question mark? Although TGMs often struggle to accurately memorize, quote, factoid knowledge within their parameters, they have developed increasingly good, quote, procedural knowledge of what should be discussed and how it should be presented, which only continues to improve with recent model scaling efforts. Again, I don't think this is knowledge, right? Like, knowledge suggests to me a degree of structure that I don't think is there for language models, right? It's... Yeah, again, I don't love the framing. The framing feels very... the framing makes a lot of assumptions about how good the models are to begin with, and what they're doing, and assumes that you agree with the author's stance in that in a way that I don't. All right. In this paper, we generally do not use the term fact-checking other than to reference relevant literature. This is because we only address attribution, and attribution does not entail correctness. Okay, good that they talk about that. Even if one can attribute a claim to a particular source, that does not guarantee that the source is correct. We discuss this further in the limitation section. Do they talk about, let me go down to limitation. Okay, I mean, basically we have a general idea of what their approach is, right? And I haven't read enough of the related literature to be able to compare and contrast it. But it looks like generally the process is query generation. So people ask, wait, no. Oh, I see. Okay, so the human is not in here. So the input text is what is generated by the system in response to the human input. Then that is used to generate a query. Then that query is used in internet search to do retrieval. I'm assuming they're using Google system based on who the authors are. And if there is no agreement, then between the suggestion and the between the retrieved information and the original input string, then it's edited, right? So here it claims that it happened February 24th, 2014, whereas a search suggests that it actually happened October 1st, 2014. So 24 February was edited to 1 October. If there is agreement, then it is not edited, and then the output is prepared, as well as the attributions. How are they doing the edits? Are they learning doing the edits? Let's see. We now propose for solving the task of editing for interpretation. The research stage, first we generate a set of queries, Q1 through Qn, each investigating one aspect of X that potentially requires attribution, X being the input passage. Okay, so how do they, okay, so generating the queries, how are they doing that? Measuring preservation, measuring attribution, task formulation. So task formulation, attribution, how much of the revised text Y can be attributed to the evidence in A, and preservation, how much of the revised text Y preserves aspects of the original text X. Okay. All right. Attribution depends on both receiving the right evidence for the attribution report and revising X so it's consistent with A. Okay, so they don't want to change the output of the model as much as possible, only in the ways that they have to measure the attribution. Okay, how are they generating the queries? Right, so how are they doing this step from taking the input passage and then creating the queries from it? Examples of few-shot learning uses the prompted PALM model. Blue is input, red is output. See Appendix A for full prompts. You said blank, I checked blank, I found this article. You said blank, I checked it. So I think they're just doing it through a, okay, there's 3 options here. Comprehensive query generation. I Googled, does your nose switch between nostrils? How did your nostril switch? Why does your nostril switch? How do they know it's comprehensive? It's generated. So how are they checking that? Are they just sort of trusting the model with their additional fine-tuning? Again, this is not an area I've worked in significantly. Are any of these citations from before 2020? Okay, this one's from 2017. I imagine later in 2017. Let's see. Excuse me. Crowdsourcing and question answering meaning representations. Oh, Luke was an author on that. I don't think I've read that. Okay. Sorry, this is me just really trying to figure out what they're doing. Okay. How are they querying? So they're saying that there's a lot of work on it. The goal of query identification is to identify the claims in X which need to be verified and attributed. A human might do this by scanning through X and asking a question about each assertion encountered. We refer to this as comprehensive question generation. Okay. So these are the examples that were used to train the model. I disagree with their example here. So the input text is your nose switches back and forth between nostrils. When you sleep, you switch about every 45 minutes. This is to prevent buildup of mucus. It's called the nasal cycle. So the questions that I would ask here, this first question, I think that's good. Does your nose switch between nostrils? When you sleep, you switch about every 45 minutes. The second question is, how often do your nostrils switch? I want to know about the relationship to sleeping and nostril switching. Why do your nostrils switch? So that's this one, and it's called the nasal cycle, so that's the last one. So it looks like there has been one question per sentence, even though there is more than one assertion per sentence. And I'm guessing that this is due to crowd workers and the fact that they are not paid enough to be careful. So that's the comprehensive query generation. Since we aim to produce a single sequence of questions covering all aspects rather than one question targeting a single aspect as done in most prior work in question generation, I'm guessing they're generating one question per sentence. A similar strategy has been used to train text planning models. We found that a prompt with 6 human demonstrations of CQ gen, shown in figure 3a, was sufficient for Palm to adequately learn the task. Okay, a citation for that? You looked at it and you're like, that seems good? To increase diversity and coverage, we sampled from our CQGen model 3 times and took the union of the resulting queries. Okay, so they're using just regular prompt engineering there based on a human-generated text, which from, again, having looked at their example here, which presumably they cherry-picked to be particularly good, I don't agree that it's actually comprehensive. Evidence retrievals, they use Google search, no surprise. They took the top 10 web pages and extract its title and snippets. We construct snippets by running a sliding window of 4 sentences across the document, breaking at document headings. The snippets from all web pages then pulled together, forming a set of candidate evidence snippets for the query. We then select evidence query snippets that are most relevant to the query, so it's just a ranking problem. In theory, we could have used a few-shot language model prompting instead of fine-tuning ranking models for relevant scoring, but this would have been expensive for inference due to large numbers of snippets to be scored. Why would you have done that? Why is that even something you would have thought about? Are you... Sometimes people just immediately go to using large language models for everything, and maybe if you work at Google and you have compute coming out of your ears, that's not an issue, but what an expensive way of thinking about how to approach these problems. My God. Water. After retrieving relevant evidence, some parts must be properly attributed, but other parts may still remain unattributed. Revision is necessary to increase the total percentage of attributed sentences. Agreement model takes a partially edited passage, a query, and evidence as input, and then decides whether both Y and E imply the same answer to the question in Q. Okay, so it's looking for agreement between both the attribution snippet and what was produced by the language model in the first place. This forms a question-guided agreement, was previously explored by Hanovich et al. Following our strategy for CQ-Gen, we implement this by few-shot prompting Palm. Okay, so they're just using Palm for basically everything. We employ a chain of thought style prompt where we ask the model to explicitly state the implied answers for both Y and E before providing its judgment about the agreement. If disagreement is detected, we run the edit model. It inputs Y, Q, and E as input and outputs a new version of Y that aims to agree with E with few-shot prompting chain of thought. Okay, yes, they are doing this all except for the query ranking and snippet detection, which I'm sure there's internal Google stuff for that, I would guess, because sometimes you get snippet outputs for queries, just like on the Google search. This is just talking about the prompting strategies they used. Interesting. Just to make sure that they didn't change too much, we simply reject edits with edit distance above, I think that's a tau, equals 0.5 times the original text length. So if it changes more than half the text, they reject it. And then they select at most M evidence snippets from the attribution report. Note that during evidence retrieval and revision, we may have encountered and used more than M snippets. Our goal is now to find a smaller subset of snippets that maximize coverage over the potentially attributable points in the passage Y represented by questions. And then they use a relevance model for selecting the most relevant snippets. And then related work. They did that thing where they put related work at the end of the section. Although, to be fair, this is a pretty well cited model. They talked about some of the fact-checking work previously, and it does look like they definitely are building on previous work. I did notice that there was a citation from the 60s while I was sort of scrolling through the bibliography. It is for Levenshtein distance, which is just a measure of edit distance for those of you who don't know how many characters are changed. Okay, so of the tasks, right? So generating the input passage, large language model, query generation, large language model, retrieval using Google search, and then ranking using, I'm sure, some sort of, regular ranking measure, determining whether there was agreement, language model, editing language model. Let's talk about the limitations. And then they have a bunch of evaluations, which I'm sure they're going to say they did great. And then some examples about correctly revising an entity, correctly revising a number, performing a larger revision, confused by misleading evidence. So this was a question that I had. Improved attribution, but reasoning doesn't adapt to new info. And then example revisions from R, both good and bad. If we disable the agreement model in RAR, it may over-edit the text. Here, the evidence E does not explicitly disagree with X, but without any agreement model to detect this, the edit model makes a unsupported change. Okay, so they're saying that I think it's a little, I guess they are doing fine-tuning. I feel like it's a little bit weird to call these all separate models when they are fundamentally based on the same language model with a little bit of extra tuning. I don't know, maybe that's just where we are as a field right now. Okay, so here we have the output was, if she knew what she wants, was written by Henry Roth, which is incorrect. Wikipedia suggests that it should be Jules Shear, and it was corrected correctly. The output was God Save the Queen became the British national anthem in 1745, incorrect according to Encyclopedia Britannica. It should have been 1825 when it was produced. Little explanation, I'm sure added by the authors. The year 1745 is when the song was first performed. Those are different questions. Performing a necessary large revision, the original output was It's My Party, a song written and composed by American singer, songwriter, and producer Walter Gold. The song was published in 1962 and first recorded by American singer-songwriter, producer, and arranger Leslie Gore. And based on secondhandsongs.com, the song was written by John Gluck, Wally Gold, Seymour Gottlieb, and Herbert Weiner. And then there were some unattributed changes, changing it from 1962 to 1963, and changing the titles of Leslie Gore to just Singer. So based on the attribution, I don't know that those other changes were actually warranted, right? The attribution was only for the one change about the author of the song, which does not solve my fundamental problem, which is like, where is this information coming from? And in the first case, it's, you know, statistical happenstance. And in the second case, it's one of them has a citation and the other ones are additional statistical happenstance. Confused by misleading evidence. So here the suggestion is In the Heat of the Night is a police procedural crime drama TV series produced by MGM Television. It aired on NBC from September 8th, 1988 to May 13th, 1992. I know nothing about this. METV.com suggests watch The Heat of the Night on METV, and that attribution caused it to change NBC to METV incorrectly. So some examples there. I'm interested to hear about their limitations. Challenging domains. Yes, so I have noticed that they have done things that all have are fairly recent, are almost certainly discussed online already, and have clear answers, right? Like music and TV shows, who wrote it, when was it airing, etc. They do have an example here about Homer Simpson, and another one that is a question about starfish. We considered news article summaries produced by summarization models from SumEval. Results are shown in table 4. So I would guess that news articles in particular, because recency is very important, you know, well, I guess it is taking results from the internet, so they may have access to most recent things, but extra challenging, right? Because you want to know what happened at a specific point. We note that before edit, auto AIS score for all models are low, right? Because news is things that's happened recently, and I don't know when the Palm data was, but I'm assuming that they're not consistently updating and retraining this model over time. Maybe they are. I don't know. That sounds expensive. These news article summaries are often about less widely known people and events, which is challenging for retrievers, leading to low attribution. Okay, but turns out that actually many people want to know about less widely known things. To be fair, they're saying that this is a challenge for their model. For example, our query generator may ask, where does John Doe live, but get results for different John Doe. John Doe is a fake name, meaning an unknown person. EFEC and Lambda also face this issue, but instead trade preservation for attribution and rewrite the text to a different topic. This result suggests that using web search with standard question generation methods may fail to capture important context from the input and is not sufficient for an attribution task. We also consider long-form explanations generated by Palm for the EL15 dataset. Not familiar with this dataset. EL5 maybe? Was collected from online forums, so many answers tend to have subjective opinions instead of specific entities and facts, and are thus difficult to attribute. Sometimes the whole output is based on a false premise and needs to be completely rewritten, in which case RAR cannot satisfactorily edit due to our revision threshold. It can only change half the input. Finally, we consider technical explanations to questions from the MMLU dataset, also unfamiliar, which covers diverse subjects from social science, humanities, STEM, and others. An example input looks like every time you remove an edge from a complete graph, you divide it into 2 connected components. So a complete graph with 13 vertices must have 12 connected components. Results are shown in table 2. RAR improves attribution of these exclamations on all 4 categories of MMLU, although increases are relatively small. We also find that RAR's performance is low on examples with mathematical reasoning, as these are beyond the capability of the edit model with our current prompt. Okay, so it looks like it works for general knowledge questions that don't change or aren't updated constantly, okay, but for other domains and tasks, it seems like it doesn't work quite as well, which makes sense. Yeah. So they're talking about some of the issues they're trying to deal with. So first, there's just a lot of language models that do good on some things. Second, state-of-the-art language models may require months to train and a major investment in compute. Therefore, we sought an attribution recipe that could, quote, sit on top of these rapid advances and major investments without needing to redesign language models from scratch. So I think that makes sense, right? I think that's a good, I like that it's model agnostic. I like that, you know, the idea is to save time and effort and energy. I think that's commendable. Since the research and revised paradigm requires minimal change to existing language models, it may serve as a natural baseline for future approaches that seek to integrate attribution more deeply into language model architectures. Although, I mean, it is itself using a language model, so you're not going to completely get away from the cost of running and retraining. Well, I mean, it's not completely retraining, but tuning. This being said, we wish to discuss several possible limitations of our approach below. So one, depending on the application, attribution and preservation may not deserve equal weight. For instance, if there are multiple acceptable options for the output, such as in a dialogue system, we may trade off preservation for attribution. Similar to how Lambda behaves in our experiments. I believe Lambda is also a Google system. Our evaluation metrics also do not measure all aspects of attribution and preservation. For instance, some sentences are self-evident and do not require attribution, e.g., I agree. A system that says I agree does not seem particularly helpful, but would be penalized in our evaluation. For preservation, we wish to explore other properties that should be preserved, such as discourse or logical coherence. Finally, if the original output of the language generation model is completely misguided or flawed, it can be difficult to revise the text without significant changes, which I would say is the use case where it's going to be the most compelling and useful to use this sort of technology. Which, and I agree, like, that's the hard part, right? I get it. It's not fully general. It doesn't edit poetry where preserving rhyme matters, or long documents, primarily because we do not provide examples of such inputs in our few-shot large language model prompts. I think there's some other issues with, you know, long-distance agreement and coherence with large language models that I wouldn't necessarily say is due purely to poor prompting. Sip of water. However, we do believe that future developers may be able to quickly adapt RAR to such tasks by simply changing the prompts. Second, RAR tends to preserve rather than delete claims it cannot attribute. That's an issue. That's like the one thing that I would really want the system to do, is that it doesn't say wrong things. Some of these claims generally do not require attribution. I mean, what system is agreeing? Who is agreeing here? Like, I would say that, you know, again, for me, I wouldn't find it useful to get that information outside of like a game situation. Judging whether a claim requires attribution can be subjective and challenging. Finally, our model is computationally costly. You don't say, since it's based on prompting a large language model several times every time. One potential solution is to leverage recent synthetic data generation recipes to train a smaller model. Interesting, I haven't heard about this. Tom says, common knowledge, quote, So there's talking about how they don't know whether the sources themselves are trustworthy, which is sort of one of the big things I was talking about, because we've even talked today about gaming search results by using generated text. So if your attribution is from text that was generated by another large language model, then that rather defeats the purpose. Even for sources that are traditionally considered authoritative, such as an encyclopedia, there may still be factual inaccuracies or biases. I mean, yeah, that's true, but you are using random searches from the internet, which I would say that's not fair. I'm not being entirely fair, but the top search results are, I would say, to me at least, less trustworthy than a published encyclopedia. The work does not address the question of whether a source is trustworthy or the related topic of misinformation. While we do not provide a means for judging trustworthiness, the design of RAR does allow for research stage to restrict its search over a user-specified corpus based on what the user deems trustworthy. This feels... So I'm going to assume when they say user here, they mean developer, because if your requirement for users is that they upload a corpus of trustworthy text that presumably includes the answer they're looking for to find the answer they're looking for, this feels circular and a bit hostile. And I realize this is a research project, right? They're not being like, here's our product recommendations. But I also know that a lot of people are building products with these types of models, and I'm sure someone has already implemented this somewhere into something that's commercially available. Sometimes my field gives me headaches. There's also a possibility that some content might be simultaneously supported by certain sources while contradicting others. Also, just as a note, they talk about misinformation. They don't talk about disinformation and malicious actors. Do they talk about that anywhere in here? Obvious limitation, and that it is not 100% successful making tests consistent with retrieved evidence. Yes, that's the thing I'd want the system for. If it doesn't work sometimes and is consistently... Yeah, Tom says, Wikipedia medical pages effectively use systematic reviews as, quote, a trusted corpus, with caveats about recency. Yeah, but I mean, at that point, it feels like it would make more sense to search for the topic that you were interested in Wikipedia. I guess the issue there might be discoverability, right? Like, you know, I'm looking for a specific muscle and I don't know what it's called, right? I don't know. I mean, the point of a system like this is to make it more trustworthy, and like, I get that nothing is ever going to be 100%, certainly in machine learning, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem that it seems trusty, right? But with an unspecified degree of just wrongness. Oh. Tom says, you will often combine facts from several reviews. That's true. It could be helpful as a way to sort of synthesize information across various sources if it were accurate, right? But if you can't, I don't know, I think it really comes down for me to trust. Like, I can't trust that the output's going to be accurate. Sorry, and I'm going to see if they talk about adversarial. Nope. Wait. Here we go. Optimizing for attribution alone cannot ensure a good revision. For example, an adversarial editor could ensure 100% attribution by simply replacing the input X with the text of any arbitrary retrieved document, which is trivially attributable to itself. I think they mean adversarial in the machine learning sense here and not adversarial in the security sense. Did they talk about disinformation? They only talked about in... They talk about missing... Got it. I missed this this footnote. So the reason they are not talking about untrustworthiness and maliciousness in general is, I am sure, due to corporate review. And if you want more information, you can go check out this, support answer that Google has from this paper that's been published by Google researchers. I don't know. I don't know. It helps with my underlying issue, right? That the output is not always reliable, but with a system that itself uses the exact same systems with additional tuning. And I guess sort of question mark about how reliable that is, and how is this going to work for other languages, right? If you're relying on a large language model all the way down with additional tuning, and your large language model works substantially better for, say, English than a language like, I don't know, Bodo, right? Then you are continuing to bake in these inequalities. And also, it opens a new realm of... You know, we were talking today about the issues with generated text and SEO phishing. And and the problems there. And then this provides, you know, if this system were used, or this approach was used at, you know, sufficiently broadly, then it would provide pretty good incentive for people to continue to do that and continue to make the general search ecosystem worse and worse, which, I mean, at least for my experience as a user, it has been getting for a while now. I would say, you know, past couple months, I've really started to notice it more and more. But maybe I'm just looking for it, right? Maybe that's confirmation bias from me. So, I don't know. I'm sure there's someone who does large scales reviews of this sort of thing that could provide more information, but also I'm sure that one of those someones is Google, and they're not going to be like, yo, guess what? Our results are worse. FYI. Maybe that's unfair towards them, and perhaps they would, but I remain skeptical. I don't know. They're addressing a problem that I do have, and I appreciate that, but in a way that just sort of disperses it. I think if it were based on a specific corpus as their default that they were using instead of search, Google search, I think I would trust it more, right? And maybe they did. It's a long paper, right? It's like 25 pages. And I didn't read the whole thing carefully. But if their approach was like, hey, yeah, here's the specific trusted corpus, right? And here's a specific, you know, example of a trusted corpus for a bunch of other languages, I would be much more willing to go along with it. But that's not what they did, right? It feels like, I don't know. The problem I have is a fundamental problem with using language models for this task, and they have used more and different language models, and I'm a little bit unconvinced that it's actually going to solve it, right? Sort of, you know, fighting fire with fire. Yeah, sure, sometimes that can work, but in this case, the issue that I have is that it's hot, and you're like, well, we'll do new and different types of hotness. Surely that will fix the problem, and I don't know that it does. And perhaps I will be proved wrong, and I'm open to that, right? But perhaps not. Also, it looks like they're looking at things that are pretty easy to look up, and they've, you know, perhaps obviously stayed far away from things like politics, for example, or legislation or court cases. And I don't think that was a bad choice on their part. I think they probably should, but areas where there is a lot of disinformation and a lot of organic disinformation already seem the most vulnerable here, and I don't know that that addresses this, and I don't think that they'd be allowed to address it in the paper, right? I don't know. Moving on, last paper. So this is a paper this is an actual paper that's been published and not a preprint. A brief report from the Psychonomic Bulletin and Review, not a, what am I looking for? Venue that I'm super familiar with. It's by Shiri Levari and Ryan McKay, and it's the sounds of swearing are their universal patterns in profanity. And I will say right now that whenever someone uses universal in a language study, my little skepticism hackles start to rise. So let's dive in. And also, I don't believe either of these researchers are in a linguistics faculty, which is okay. You know, people outside of linguistics do research on language, but sometimes not in the way that linguists would. So, abstract. Why do swear words sound the way they do? Also, this I think is going to be a little bit of a iconicity paper, which also tends to make me go, and sort of be a little bit extra skeptical. Swear words are thought to have sounds that render them especially fit for purpose, facilitating the expression of emotion and attitude. To date, however, there's been no systemic cross-linguistic investigation of phonetic patterns and profanity. May we have, please and thank you, a citation for this. Okay, sound symbolism. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. Hello, Henry. Welcome. In an initial pilot study, we explored statistical regularities in the sounds of swear words across a range of typologically distant languages. Is one of these ones. It's kind of a thing that people like to do is look at different languages and sort of compare them to each other and then make claims about universality, which generally the selection of languages is not truly random. Let me put it that way. We talked about samples of convenience, right? The best candidate for a cross-linguistic phonemic pattern in profanity was the absence of approximants. Studies like l, w, and y. These are cross-linguistically rare sounds. Okay, I'm gonna have to see their stats. Those are cross-linguistically rare sounds, so you would have to compare the differences between swear words and other words in those languages, and they would have to be other words that have sort of similar degrees of that tend to occur in more or less the same places in sentences, right? Like I might compare them to like something like greetings that tend to occur on their own. Yes, so we'll see. Again, my skeptic hackles are up. In study 1, native speakers of various languages, Arabic, Chinese, Finnish, French, German, Spanish, n equals 215. French and Spanish are extremely closely related to each other, and these three are all Indo-European, and Finnish is Finno-Ugric. I don't know what the parent for that is. Let me look it up real quick. Finnish, typological family tree. Henry says, my professor says he once surveyed the Asian population in his research. The Asian population? When he actually only collected feedback from Cantonese speakers who lived in specific neighborhoods. Yeah, what a way to homogenize a continent. Oh. It's Uralic. Yes. Okay, so yes. So Arabic, Chinese, and Finnish, fairly unrelated to each other. Is Arabic Indo-European? I know it's... let me see. Arabic. What I'm saying here is that it is a stretch to call French and Spanish typologically unrelated to each other. It's Semitic. Is Semitic the Afroasiatic? Proto-Afroasiatic. Okay, so yes, Arabic, Chinese, Finnish, very unrelated to each other. French, German, and Spanish, half the sample. French and Spanish, extremely closely related to each other. And German, also fairly closely related. Judged foreign words as less likely to be swear words if they contained an approximant. Chinese has only yeah, well, but it also has a very restrictive phonotactic. I also don't know what they mean by Chinese, right? Do they mean Mandarin speakers? Do they mean, you know, Wu speakers? There's a lot of variation about in what someone might call themselves a Chinese speaker. Judged foreign words. Which is foreign here? Are they from what language? Less likely to be swear words if they contain an approximant. In study 2, we found that sanitized versions of English swear words like darn instead of damn contain significantly more approximants than the original swear words. Our findings reveal that not all sounds are equally suitable for wait, that goes against their... So they're... Oh, all right. So they're claiming the absence of approximants, right? So being changed to here, they're suggesting that that is an additional approximant. Our findings reveal that not all sounds are equally suitable for profanity and demonstrate that sound symbolism, whether certain sounds are intrinsically associated with certain meanings, is more pervasive than has previously been appreciated, extending beyond denoting single contexts to serving pragmatic functions. That is quite the claim. Henry says, no sampling bias there, lol. And perhaps they have the strength of evidence to back it up. Also, if the foreign language here is English and they have done both their corpus study on English and their perception study on English, I will, it could be still an interesting result, but I will go through and cross out universal every single time it appears. They start up by coming up with some made-up star fantasy words from Star Wars, Star Trek, and Battlestar Galactica. I will say that those are all shows in English for English speakers. Writers who invent alien profanities may rely on their intuitions about what makes swear words offensive and transgressive here on Earth. Or they could be, you know, sampling from the phonotactics of their native language. Yeah, possibly. And primed by the existence of swears in their native language. The notion that sounds in such words, their phonemes, contribute to their offensiveness itself transgresses a fundamental linguistic principle that the connection between a sound and a meaning of a word is arbitrary. I don't know that people would strongly claim this. Right? Like, obviously there is onomatopoeia in language. And this also feels like, you will notice the citation dates on here. This feels a little bit straw man-y. Yeah, you want to talk to some linguists who are alive, but Saussure very famously wrote about linguistics. And his published works were published from a collection of notes that students took during his classes posthumously. Nevertheless, a range of authors have suggested that swear words have sounds that render them fit for purpose. Aha! This I would... Every field has at least one person in it who is a horrible person and gets a lot of public attention. And unfortunately, Steven Pinker is ours. Hey, Henry. Yeah, good question. What is Mandarin? What is Chinese? Question mark. Yep. He has also very famously blocked many linguists who are active on Twitter because they keep telling him he's wrong about things and he hates it. Nonetheless, a range of authors have suggested that swear words have sounds that render them officially fit for purpose. And I would say, I'm assuming, actually, let me make sure I'm not just like making aspersions that are not. Yeah, it is. 2016. Okay, so this looks like a popular science book. This looks like another popular science book. That's a popular science book. That's a popular science book. Well, actually, this may not be. Let me be fair. My skepticism hackles have gone even further up. Senior lecturer of philosophy. Okay. The sounds of taboo. Okay, so this is in Pragmatics and Cognition, not a journal I'm familiar with, but these folks may be Valerie and Lemons, The Sounds of Taboo, exploring a sound meaning association swear words in English. And then Wijermb, expletive derivative, a good look at bad language. All right, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 popular science citations and one scientific article. That's not, particularly if you were talking about a field adjacent to your own, not generally a great way to show that you have a depth of knowledge of scholars working in that field. And perhaps they are just assuming that the reader will also be familiar with those works and have brought them up as sort of a way to be like, oh, you know, those things that we've all read because they're popular science books. But generally, when a scientist is trying to make a, you know, particularly, I would say, in sort of the psychology, psycholinguistics field, most of the major contributions come in the form of journal articles and not popular science books. Or not books, right? We're not a field where people tend to publish books if their aim is to make a scholarly contribution. That was my neck cracking. I don't know if you heard that. To date, however, there has been no systematic cross-linguistic study of the phonetic patterns in profanity. I assume what they're arguing here is that that's what this paper is. Here we investigate whether speakers of disparate languages deem certain sounds to be better at expressing profanity than others. The general idea that certain phonemes or phonetic combinations are intrinsically associated with certain meanings is known as sound symbolism. Are they? One sec. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, are they gonna cite the Boba Kiki work from 1929? They are, so that's good. The nasal sound is much more likely to occur in words for nose than others. Okay. When the Boba Kiki, so those are, you know, a very early study on sound symbolism that you'll be shocked to hear most linguists actually know about. Sound symbolism can also manifest in a perceived mismatch between a sound and meaning. Thus, across languages, the sound N is statistically unlikely to appear in the word for skin. What's the mismatch there? PNAS, of course. Sorry, PNAS is the Proceedings of the National Academy for Sciences, another journal that tends to publish kind of low-quality linguistics work that people who aren't in linguistics can sometimes be excited about. And then this is from 2020 in Linguistic Typology. Phonosemantic biases found in Leipzig-Jakarta list of 66 languages. I am not familiar with this one. I'll just pop this open. From Linguistic Typology, 66 distinct languages. Morphemes whose meanings were related to a round shape tend to contain phonemes that bear the round feature. Nothing in egg is rounded. Nothing in navel is rounded. This is in English. Nothing in neck is rounded. And nothing in knee is rounded. So this is definitely not a universal, right? It looks like a bit of a tendency, but certainly for English, it does not hold, period. Also observable is the plosive association between buccal actions of the lips, and the phonological features they represent. To blow with labial and to suck with delayed release. Blow is true of English, suck is not true of English. Grammatical morphemes related to proximity, this and in, first singular and second singular pronoun, so I and you, are positively associated with nasal. So only in English. The phonosemantic patterns are found in most basic vocabulary of spoken languages, further confirm that the sound meaning association in natural languages is not completely arbitrary, but may be motivated by human cognitive biases. So this is a much weaker claim, and also, as you can see, it is there is an association. It is certainly not a universal, as we talked about these examples just from the abstract with English. Period. That's it. That's the end of the sentence. Let me close these. Okay. I should say this is a study. I have actually, as an aside, I have actually worked in iconicity quite a bit, particularly around signed languages. So it's an area that I have read quite a bit in the linguistics literature. Surveying 125 participants over 5 languages, many of which have various dialects, sounds quite ambitious for scientific accuracy. How do people survey in the linguistic field reliably? Well, the big thing is that we don't generally make claims about universals. Generally, surveys are of a specific population, right? So for my perceptual work I also have a background in perceptual phonetics, as it turns out, and experimental design. You will try and sample from a single population, controlling for as many variables that are relevant to your work as possible, right? So for my work on perception of New Zealand vowels, I only looked at speakers from North America. There's a lot of variation within North American vowel systems. So I believe I also... but none of that variation would have been in the same direction as you find in the New Zealand vowel system. So I didn't control for where in North America people were from, which means I also included Canadians, but I did control for level of exposure to New Zealand English. So are they convenient samples mostly? I mean, yes. In general, there's a lot of convenient sampling, and generally people are pretty straightforward about it. If you are doing perceptual studies, you can generally get a little bit more of a wider population because of you can do it online, right? They don't generally have to be as closely controlled. Production studies are much more difficult because if you're studying a fine phonetic feature, you need to have a very high quality recording. And most people don't have podcaster mics in their house. So, okay, so they do point out that sound symbolic associations are probabilistic rather than deterministic in nature. Ah, yes, those probabilistic universals. They're not being very careful with their language here, which, as it turns out, is kind of important when it comes to scientific publishing. Thus, when the sound N is overrepresented in words for nose, there are many languages in which the word for nose does not include it. Similarly, when the sound M is underrepresented in words for skin, there are languages in which the word for skin includes the sound. Some sound symbolic effects may reflect awareness of reliable co-occurrences in nature. Smaller objects tend to produce higher frequencies than larger objects. So so corresponding between the vowel E, that's the I symbol, and the concept of small occurs persistently across languages from different continents and linguistic lineages. And this is another PNAS paper, but it was also replicated in linguistic typology. And I will say, I think I've actually read the Blasi et al., and I remember it being okay. And even infants preferentially look at small rather than a large circle upon hearing vowels with high formant frequencies. I mean, one sec. So sorry, I am being a bit of a butt here, but that is in fact not what they mean. They mean specifically the second formant. So you can see this is the vowel E here, this top one. If we are looking at the spectrogram, you can see that the first formant for E is actually lower than the first formant, for example, for A, or for ah. It's this line here at the bottom. So factual inaccuracy. Like I said, this is not a linguistics journal, so I don't expect this to have been reviewed by linguists. Yes. Also, I do love how they were like, linguists think this, and then cited a bunch of linguistic studies showing that, well, actually, linguists don't necessarily think that, by the way. you are not owning the linguists by citing them saying the things that you agree with. But in general, in spoken languages, I think most linguists agree that the effects of iconicity are very limited. In signed languages, the effects of iconicity are much stronger. And in most modern written languages, the effects of iconicity are much weaker than they were at some point in the past, right? So some writing systems were originally strongly iconistic and have become less so. And I believe Hangul actually was designed to originally be fairly iconic of articulations. Let me double check that though. It's not a writing system I'm super familiar with. I'm just aware of it. This is the writing system for English. And I believe the original characters, which have changed a little bit, were intended to represent the to a certain degree, the articulation, right? Yeah, so I'm reading from Wikipedia here. So the consonant, it looks like English uppercase letter E, is composed of 3 strokes, each one meaningful. The top stroke indicates that it's a plosive. The middle stroke indicates that it is aspirated, and the bottom stroke indicates that it's alveolar. Okay, so it's not actually iconic. Yeah, no, it's not. Okay, so I vaguely remembered someone mentioning at some point, and I don't know if this is accurate information or not, and from a brief browse, I don't think it is, that the original design of the Hangul letters was intended to mimic the position of the articulators in creating those sounds that they represent. It is a syllabary. It's probably the most linguistically informed writing system in the world. If I had had to learn Hangul, I probably would have had less trouble in school rather than the Latin alphabet. Or Chinese characters, as I mentioned, a subject that I failed at both as a child and in my adult life. And I do mean that. I do mean the failing. Anyway, and then sound symbolism and swearing. Several authors have maintained that the main function of sound symbolism is to scaffold language acquisition in children, but sound symbolism may also facilitate the expression of emotion, attitude, or arousal. Human and non-humans produce harsh, abrasive sounds when distressed, and smooth sounds when calm and contented. What is a smooth sound here, bud? The sound symbolic role of consonants in the classic Tekete Maluma phenomenon from the Canadian Journal of Experimental Psychology. Okay, so I think the smooth sounds are the same ones that the boba, the maluma, were constructed into, and specifically they mean not obstruent, so sounds where there is no complete constriction of the either the oral or the nasal cavity. Yes. I had to think about that and look at those examples for a second. Alexia said something in Hangul. Don't read it. Yes, that writing system. Thank you for the example. I'm gonna guess that says Hangul. Actually, I'm still on the Wikipedia page on another tab. Let's see if I can see an example. No. Nope. Scroll. No, it doesn't look the same. Unless that character means something else. I don't know. Wait. The first character, or I guess first syllable, I don't know. You'll have to share with me. These tendencies may underpin a sound symbolic association between certain phonemes and profanity. Canadian Journal of Experimental Psychology. So it looks like this really is more in the experimental psychology literal. This looks like this is more in the experimental psychology literature. And also it looks like the same sort of like small number of authors are being cited again and again, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It means that it's closely related to these folks' research program. And let's just, was it Nielsen and Rendell? Okay, and these are different authors, so they're not self-citing either. Which, again, not necessarily an issue if it's the correct citation. Yep. Numerous authors have offered speculations about specific phonetic patterns in swearing and their potential functions, often suggesting that swear words are rich in plosives, e.g. PTK, citations here, all things that they've cited before. What is the evidence for such patterns? Van Lanker and Cummings found that the involuntary swearing of English patients with Tourette's syndromes were phonetically atypical, for example, being unusually likely to contain a plosive or fricative content, in particular F or K at the beginning of a word. I wonder if there are any swears in English that start with F or K that might be priming these English speakers. Who knows? Alexi says mons. I don't know what that means. I made a face that you can't see because the face cam's off. Yardy compared sounds of English swear words with those in carols and lullabies, reporting that swear words contained relatively higher portion of plosive consonants, while the carols and lullabies contained proportionally more sonorant consonants, l and w. As examples, so those are the approximants, and this is a master's thesis. Nothing against master's theses. In the US at least, and it looks like this is from Canada, so perhaps a different educational system. Generally, you would expect the content of a master's thesis to be perhaps a little bit less careful and high quality than the content of a PhD. Alexi says it's like, hooray! Cool, thank you. Yeah, I mentioned you're quite close to Korea, if I recall, like physically close. Certainly closer than me. I mean, cool topic for a master's thesis, though. Bergen reported that profane English monosyllables are more likely than control monosyllables to end with a plosive, e.g. K. Okay, so another of these. Also interested to know what the control monosyllables are and what was controlled for. Excuse me. Ariani et al. Found that German speakers rate pseudo words as more arousing and negative. This is part of a bivalent, I guess, a two-direction description of emotion. So things can either be arousing or depressing. They could be sort of like activating and energizing, or the opposite of that. And they can either be positive or negative. So you think about it like a four-way square. If they include short vowels, voiceless consonants, and to a degree, plosives. Finally, Riley et al. Examined predictors. So there is a work on German. German is also very closely related to English. Finally, Riley et al. Examined predictors of tabooness for both existing English words and novel taboo compounds, which I'm not going to read. Words with a higher proportion of plosives and affricates were rated as more taboo and considered better candidates for compounding. Interesting. Okay, so this is also for Psychonomic Bulletin Review, so this journal, which makes sense, right? If you're applying to a journal, you're going to, if you are citing a bunch of other papers in that journal, it probably means you're in the same scholarly tradition, so it makes sense. Sorry, what I am looking at here is whether they are controlling for the phonotactics, and based on the examples here of arm and ass. So this has a nucleus, no onset, and a complex coda, so it has multiple codas, multiple sounds after the nucleus. Ass just has a single coda and a single nucleus sound, right? So that's two sounds. This one is three sounds. This is three sounds. This is three sounds. But given that they weren't controlling for the phonotactics, and also that we know that not every word can appear everywhere in the sort of envelope of a word, right? So in English, you can have at So you can have sort of close to the vowel, right? So you can have ing, ing. You can have ings, ings, but you can't have isng, isng, right? They have to be arranged in a certain way. So if you're not controlling for the length and the number of moras, of stress units, if you will, in your word, you're also going to be affecting the distribution of sounds, right? So if you allow for both simple and complex codas, you're going to present the option to have potentially more total, affricates, plosives, fricatives in your sample, because those can occur at the end as well as right next to the nucleus, right? So I haven't read this study. I have some questions about their token selection. All right. The present studies. As reviewed above, there's provisional evidence that English swear words contain a relative preponderance of plosive consonants, and that English natives are sensitive to this pattern. I'm thinking about, I will say that there is a suggestion based on these multiple studies. However, previous studies have focused on specific sounds, in particular plosives, rather than systematically testing for patterns across a full range of phonemic groups. Yeah, because that's much harder to make claims about. Moreover, it is unknown whether the patterns for plosives, if robust, extends beyond a handful of related Indo-European languages. In some cases, associations between sound and meaning may emerge to a given language due to a random co-occurrence of phonological and semantic features, which occurred in the history of the languages, because they're related, so their words for similar things are going to be cognates, which means they share a root, which means they're going to probably share more sounds. Phonoasthemes, I've never heard of this term before, are small clusters of words with similar meaning that initially through coincidence also have similar phonemic forms and functions as function as attractors for new words, snowballing into larger language specific clusters. E.g., in English, 39% of words beginning with gl, GL, relate to vision or light, such as glisten and gloaming. I'm guessing this is type frequency and not token frequency. It may be that any association between plosives and profanity is an oddity of English and related languages, attributable to historical and cultural contingency in a particular language rather than underlying cognitive bias. In this present study, we explored sound regularities and squaring across several distinct languages, combining real-world and experimental data. Combining real-world. Oh, so real-world, like naturally occurring, not elicited through experimentation. So in the pilot study, they looked at a bunch of typologically distinct languages, and they suggest that their strongest candidate was a absence of approximants, sound like l, w, and y. We thus focused on approximants for our two subsequent studies. Okay, so pilot study. Okay. Recruited fluent speakers of several typologically different languages. Okay. How many is several? Present study, we study several. Okay. I feel like several languages and universals don't really belong in the same paper, but I think my main problem with this paper is that they are making very strong claims. And also straw manning the field of linguistics, which, as a linguist, by training, I kind of take objection to. So I may be a little bit less kind to this paper than I might have been under other circumstances. And that is a personal failing. Okay, so the study, they did, all right, so they looked at Hebrew, Hindi, Hungarian, Korean, and Russian. I believe, is Hungarian Indo-European? Let me double check that. It's Uralic, so it's related to, excuse me. It's related to Finnish. Okay, so these are in fact unrelated. Hebrew is actually a little bit of an interesting case. It's a revitalized language, right? It was a language that was not really used for day-to-day communication, and then through concerted efforts it was. Hindi is Indo-European, Hungarian is Uralic, Korean is and Russian is let's look those up. Korean. I do know that there's a lot of disagreement about the language topology specifically of Asia and Asian, the languages of Asia and Polynesia. Polynesia is a little bit easier because they tended to have diverged a little bit less recently, but particularly like the linguistic topology of Taiwan in particular is extremely challenging and diverse. Korean is Koreanic. So from the language family of Korean. And then Russian, I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, I want to know the Russian language, thank you. Slavic. Oh, so Russian and Hindi are actually both Indo-European, so those are not unrelated languages. To be fair, they don't say they're unrelated, they say they are distant, which is, it's just true. They're fairly, Hindi and Russian are fairly different, fairly distantly related, but they are from the same language family. We recruited 20 fluent speakers of each language via Prolific. Oh, interesting. So who was it? Henry asked about the convenience sample. I've not heard about this. Okay, so it looks like it's similar to Mechanical Turk, but specifically for research participants. And it looks like there's some specific verification that participants have to do to be participants. We asked each respondent to provide us with a list of the most vulgar words of their language. We requested that they consider both the most vulgar words that are used in their language when someone gets hurt or frustrated, and the most offensive words that are used to disparage someone, e.g., to curse someone, e.g., disparage or insult them. They were asked to provide a minimum of 5 to 10 words. Occasionally, they provided phrases as well as single words. In total, we collected 86 words and phrases in Hebrew, 126 in Hindi, 68 in Hungarian, 70 in Korean, and 94 in Russian. They pre-registered the study, so that's good. So pre-registration is where you say what you're going to do beforehand, so it's a little bit harder to do. People call it post-hockery, which is basically you go fishing for something, you do a bunch of analyses and reanalyses and re-switching your data around to try and get the result that you want. We also consulted native speakers to identify alternate versions and included only the most frequent one of the alternates. Lastly, we excluded racial slurs. Why? You are studying swearing. This is a very important piece of swearing. In fact, certainly in studies looking at English, the most offensive words are consistently all racial slurs, although many of them also contain approximants. Thinking of them in my head, I'm not saying any of them aloud, and please don't say it in the chat. I will ban you. Nope. That is a interesting choice. And I wonder why they did it. To ensure that they were profane and measure the frequency and degree of, so they did like a second level of checking with native speakers. So I would say, honestly, as a way of, Alexi is talking about one of the particular swears. I have no idea how to pronounce this or, what sounds it has. Generally, if you are providing non-English examples in a paper about non-English languages, particularly we're talking about the phonetics, you provide the IPA gloss so that people know what sounds are in it. Just generally, just linguistics things. This is one of those things that I'm not being particularly kind about. I have no idea what this says. I believe Alexei speaks Russian, so don't provide a translation unless it is something that someone in English would not generally find offensive. So I do appreciate, A, I do appreciate they're working with multiple languages. B, I do appreciate that they are doing a second level of double checking, that they checked with native speakers. So I do appreciate how careful they are being with the multilingual data here. Certainly something I'd love to see more of in NLP. So thumbs up for that. And they got 20 participants per language group, and then rated them for various things, including that they were not a curse word. None of the words were flagged as not a swear word by the majority of participants. And then they filtered words to exclude multiple variants of the same word. And if they were in multiple phrases, we only kept the phrase if it included at least one offensive word that did not appear on its own or was rated as more common than all the constituent swear words. And in that case, they removed the appearance. So this is to avoid, having undue influence of a specific lexical item. And they said they were going to do that beforehand, so pretty good. And then they looked at the phonemic group in the swear words. Control words comprise the Swadesh list. Okay, so in that case, you're not controlling for frequency, you're not controlling for length, you're not controlling for... So the Swadesh list is an elicitation list of words that are presumed to be very common cross-linguistically. So it includes things like fire, for example. And in the case of Hebrew, the 207 item Swadesh list is this. No, you should use the same list for all of them. Why are you adding additional words for only one of your samples? I don't know why they did that. I probably wouldn't have. Yes. So the issue with using the Swadesh list here, Alexi says, it's an interesting word, which pretty much means condom. Haven't heard it in a while. Oh, interesting. This is a pretty recent study, so perhaps they have slightly older participants on this this elicitation platform. Yes. It has been shown that the phonemic inventories of the Swadesh list correlate well to the established phonemic inventories, such as UCLA Phonological Segment Inventory Database. Okay, yeah, but the issue here is that you are claiming that it is the profanity, right? It is the offensiveness, it is the semantic content of these words, which is causing the change. So what I would have done is I would have controlled for, length, and I would also have looked for other non-profane interjections, right? Because you're claiming that this is symbolic, so I would expect to rule out influence from, say, the pressures of specific syntactic positioning to make sure that you are also, using words that would be used in the same place syntactically, right? Or from the same part of speech, but did not have the profane content, right? Because then you can say, oh, I know, or I have evidence that it is the semantics that's making the difference here, and not the syntax, not the frequency, not the Swadesh list contains a lot of nouns. So if there's like noun morphemes or markers, like agentive markers, for example, that occur in some of these languages, I'm not that familiar with all of them, then you can be like, oh, and I know that it's probably not, a specific type of morpheme that's affecting a specific type of word. So I would say this is, because they are making strong claims about these sounds being specifically as opposed to encoding semantic meaning, I would have done a better job with finding matched items, right? I don't think the Swadesh list is a good comparison here, is what I'm saying there. I think it is the comparison of convenience, because there's a lot of cross-linguistic ones, but I don't think that it is a, particularly helpful one. We also know that, there's a relationship between phonetics and phonotactics, and in particular the frequency of words. So very frequent words tend to be shorter, which means they're going to contain fewer phonemes. And the Swadesh list contains some words that are pretty infrequent in day-to-day conversation for most people, right? They're included because they're words that are likely to be from the parent language and not borrowed in, not necessarily because they are the most common words in that language, right? So, yes, so some of them are pretty common words, but for example, things like kill. Actually, there's more, they're using the 100-word one. There's more verbs in here than I remembered. So there's another thing, right? The part of speech might be in effect. So things like tooth, the front tooth, tongue, claw, foot, knee, hand, belly, neck, heart, liver. These are not things that I talk about particularly regularly. It does include some pronouns, right? I, you, we, some demonstratives, this and that, some question particles, who and what, negation, not all, right? But it's not a super match list. Also, it's a very small list, right? So you're looking at 100 lexical items, yeah? And then you're comparing that to 34 in Hebrew. That's where they're using the... Okay, so they do have more words in Hebrew than they do for the Swadesh list, so maybe that's why they use the longer Swadesh list, but I'm guessing that that's also just they had it available, so they used that. But that means that the results from Hebrew are not going to be comparable to the other ones. 14 in Hindi, 14 in Hungarian, 17 in Korean, 26 in Russian. These are small samples, which makes it all the more important to have really carefully matched lexical items to compare it against. The Swadesh list ain't cutting it for me here. Also, I think Swadesh was an anthropologist. Yeah, Morris Swadesh, the linguist Morris Swadesh, who uses lexicostatistics and glottochronology to determine which words are likely to occur in most languages. The list has also been used to address other linguistic questions, from the rate of change to sound symbolism. Is this also one of those yeah. This is the one that I was a little bit skeptical of. I vaguely remember this paper coming out and people being like, and perhaps, again, that's unfair. I haven't read it in a while. Perhaps it is fairly good. But the reason that you use the Swadesh list for lexical change is that these are lexical items that are going to continue to exist in the language, right? Your term for negation is going to continue to exist in the language regardless of really large language change, right? The idea is that these are words that should also not be borrowed, right? So you don't generally borrow your pronouns from another language. You generally have pronouns from your parent language in general. So Alexei says only 26 in Russian. Yeah, you know, I get the impression in general Russians are extremely polite and don't have a lot of swears. That is a joke. I don't think that is a particularly helpful way to think about language varieties. And it's reeks of an essentialism that I don't enjoy. Perhaps I should have not have said that. Anyway. Yes, so they were using the Swadesh list. And the other thing they could have done is they could have used a larger corpora and just have an idea of the general distribution of the phonemic sounds in the language overall, and then show that there is a distinction between, you know, the general phonemic inventory of the language by, you know, by phone across the whole language using a larger sampling rather than, again, using this very short list. We then compare the prevalence of each consonant group to the simulated samples to its prevalence in the swear word of that language. Wait. What? What? Sorry, one sec. So they're using the Swadesh list as control words, and they're using the UCLA Phonemic Segment Inventory database, and then they generated 1,000 simulations per language. In each simulation, we randomly sampled from the Swadesh list of the language as many phonemes as were present in the set of swear words for that language. Why? Oh, right, they're right. They're creating novel swear words. That's right. We then compare the prevalence of each consonant group in the simulated samples to its prevalence in the swear word. To do this, we classified all consonants into plosives, blah, 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 blah. Plosive affricates, approximate sibilant fricatives, and non-sibilant fricatives, and nasals. Most of the Swadesh lists we use came from a specific database, so we adopted its phonetic encoding. Yep, so... approximates. So approximates, I should also say, are it's kind of a what is it, like a dustbin taxon. It's sort of the sounds that are not of the other sounds, right? So it's ones that have sort of partial constriction of the vocal tract, and it's not as articulatorily coherent as some of the other categories. Okay, calculate the difference. Rare word. Dependent variable. Like, what? No, they are doing straight up. I thought they were doing this to create the words. They're doing there's real words. What? Word creation is not random. Why are you simulating this? None of these are rare languages. You can just get a corpus. What a wild choice. Okay. So basically they're saying that it's not even the same effect direction for all of these languages, and they're making claims of universality based on a simulation? Okay, I've seen enough. I wouldn't cite this. What were the languages again? One sec, let me, what were the languages again? I don't think any of these are like extremely low resource. Hebrew, Hindi, Hungarian, Korean, and Russian. You might have a little bit of trouble with Hungarian, but there are corpora in, one sec, let me, Hungarian language corpus. There's a Hungarian national corpus! I'm trying not to yell into this mic. There's a publicly available free corpus of Hungarian on the internet. I'm losing my voice. Why are you making up data? Why are you doing this simulation study that includes just made up data? You have the distribution in your sample. You have, this small set of words that, you've carefully filtered. Great. You can figure out the distribution of phonetic sounds in the rest of the language using a corpus. Why would you think that this is a reasonable way to study languages? The data exists. You don't have to make it up. And then even after all that nonsense, right, which I'm assuming they're doing because it like supports their point a little bit better, although they are doing pre-registration, so I should be fair. Yeah, Benson is hungry. You don't even find the same degree. You don't even find the same direction of effect across all these languages, and you're gonna claim universal patterns? Okay, you know what? To be fair, it's a question, and the answer is no. Okay, good job. Ugh. Well, that's it for this today. I don't really want to keep reading this paper. I'm done. I've seen what I needed to see. What is Betteridge's law? I think that if somebody asks a question in a headline, the answer is no. Is it Betteridge's law of headlines? Yes, Betteridge's law of headlines is an adage that states any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered with the word no. So I'm just going to apply that and call it a day. Also, if you need a Hungarian corpus, it's available. It's a gigaword corpus. That's pretty good. So they even have frequency counts. They have frequency counts on this webpage. It was literally the first result. To be fair, search results are personalized. I almost certainly search for corpus data more than most people on Earth. However, anyway, also, this is a shortening for a part of speech called a clitic, C-L-I-T-I-C, just to clarify, if any of you were confused. So I'm going to call that there. I would strongly recommend not reading this paper. I'm not particularly convinced by the evidence that they present. Let me put it that way. Anyway, with that, if you're interested in my annotated bibliography for all of these papers that we talked about today that I will share out tomorrow, probably share out later today, please feel free to head on over to my Ko-fi. It is ko-fi.com/rctatman. And a huge shout out and thank you to my many wonderful supporters who do that every month. I really appreciate you. You help make this possible. Sorry for yelling in the mic. I was really trying not to. Yes. So thank you all very much for joining me. Thank you to my wonderful supporters. I really appreciate y'all. And I will see you on Thursday for our coffee chat. And I have something that I'm filming immediately after coffee chat. It will be shorter. It will be shorter. It has to be. I may not talk about everything that I plan to talk about, but I will definitely make sure that the folks who have signed up for the links, all the links, this one, all the folks who are signed up for the links do get all the links that I was planning to cover, even if I don't get to all of them on stream. So, and I'm very much looking forward to the thing that I am going to talk about that I'm recording. I think y'all will like it. Hopefully. All right. Oh, thank you for joining, Docky. And thank you for your support. I appreciate you. Alexi says, I want to see a series of videos where you lose your mind over very bad papers. I don't think I need that in my life. I've got, you know, enough to be upset about, but, yep. Anyway, thank you for joining today, everybody. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. We talked about a lot of really cool stuff today. I think that first paper in particular was particularly interesting on the, you know, unintended consequences of machine learning using a lot of features and racializing people automatically. So thank you for joining. I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.